So, how did all of this start? The culture war, where we are today in politics. Some say, for those that pay attention heavily to electoral politics, that Donald Trump's emergence, that phenomenon resulted in this. But there was a lot of stuff that was going on well before this, and there are many people who believe Gamergate was the beginning of the culture war. I think that's a fair assessment. There were certain things going on that, with media outlets, with Facebook, with the algorithms, that ultimately lead to this phenomenon, which leads to things like Gamergate. But I think this was the first time we got a higher level political conversation. And I wonder if it actually has anything to do with politics and more so to do with just a bifurcated generation. Two different tribes of younger people, two different worldviews. And as they get older and move into the political spaces, their divergent worldviews eventually clash. We're going to talk about that and a whole lot more. Joining us to talk about this, we have Brianna Wu.
Good to meet you, Tim.
Yes, thanks for coming. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Brianna Wu. I think I'm a retired four-star general in the culture war. Today I run a pack with Cenk Uygur over at TYT. Very proud to do that. And Tim, I know I've said some snarky things about you online, so I appreciate you inviting me to your home nonetheless.
Invited. Yes. Oh, no, right on, absolutely. And then we have Alex Baldwin. Do you want to grab that mic?
That's me. I hope this works. I'm Alex. I'm also known as the Hat Man. This hat right here is what I'm known for. I was the head moderator on Reddit. Make your jokes now, please. But for Kotaku in Action, which was the Gamergate subreddit. And basically, that's how I built my not-so-cult following.
Well, so how do we begin then? Do one of you want to explain Gamergate or where we're at?
Well, I could certainly explain Gamergate, but I think the reason Alex and I are both here today is we've had 10 years to reflect on this. Alex, I consider us friends at this point. He literally ran the Gamergate subreddit, Tim. And something the two of us feel very strongly about is a lot of people made money and got what they wanted from Gamergate. Neither of us got anything we were fighting for. I look at women's rights 10 years later. It's not in a better place from before Gamergate. The things you were fighting for, as far as wanting journalism and more openness in how game journalists were reporting things, I don't think that's in a better state today. I think what I really came here to talk to you about, Tim, is I think the entire premise of your show, Culture War, I think it's flawed. I think you have two veterans here on different sides who have really come to the conclusion that this is not a way forward for our country. It's a war that cannot be won.
Well, what's the premise that's flawed?
That we need to have a culture war and we need to be fanning these issues that are on the side, having very hyperbolic, approaches to talking to each other. The thing I've learned,
but we don't do that.
I think I have a different assessment, respectfully. But what I wanted to say is, the conclusion I've come to is, I think if you're really serious about making women's lives better in this country, talking and screaming at each other on Twitter, I don't think it's an effective way forward. I think we need to be far more focused on policies that improve women's lives. And I think that's one of the main things that feminists missed during Gamergate.
So in what way, I guess, would you say that this show engages in that kind of behavior?
Tim, so one of my goals today is I don't want to be contentious with you. I did watch a lot of your show preparing for this. I think that, respectfully, you tend to really inflame these culture war points. I watched your segment with Jackson Hinkle. I've seen how you talk about the left and Joe Biden and Democrats in general. I think it's very hyperbolic. I don't think it's good for the country or the conversation.
So anything in specific that we could use as a launching point to discuss?
Do you want this whole time to be talking about you? I'd really rather talk about the issues.
I'm asking you to bring up an issue that we could use as a launching point to discuss.
Sure.
Because just saying like your show does bad isn't anything I can really elaborate on.
That's fair. So let's talk about the Jackson Hinkle. No, I'll tell you, how about the Liberty Safe thing you did yesterday? I watched this segment on that. And you're talking about, well, leftists believe this. Leftists want to take away your guns.
I didn't say that.
Leftists, or people on your show did.
No
leftists are going to be upset about this.
Nobody said that.
People can go watch the segment.
Right, and for sure. So one thing we're very clear about is that leftists are pro-gun.
Some leftists are pro-gun.
A large portion, like the John Brown Gun Club, the Red Guard. You've got a lot of organizations that are more revolutionary, are very pro-gun. So we didn't say that. That's not something we talked about.
I hear what you're saying. I respect it. I watched the segment. I came to a different conclusion. My point here is I think there are, even if I will give you the premise just for the sake of a discussion here, your show is not part of this. I think it is, but just to move forward, let's say other shows are doing this. I think we are madmen with our hands around each other's throats, and I think we cannot let go. You did a segment with Jackson Hinkle that I found tremendously disturbing. And, I think he was here talking about a bunch of frankly pro-Kremlin talking points. And the whole time I'm watching it, Tim, I'm thinking about how the whole reason that Vladimir Putin chose to invade Ukraine at this particular moment is we are so divided. He sees us as weak and stupid and unable to agree on anything. And I think January 6th was really his moment that he knew America was too divided to stop what he wanted to do. And I do think that division is a function of the culture war.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I think, I actually agree. Vladimir Putin took the opportunity, January 6th being a component of the division in America, to say, if war is to escalate in Eastern Europe or in, say, the Pacific Theater, the U.S. is in serious trouble because it can't even agree with itself how to respond to these things.
That's right.
So if you've got Republicans just saying no to funding Ukraine's the war in Ukraine, and Democrats saying yes to funding it, Vladimir Putin, China, they've basically got carte blanche to a certain degree, because the United States, if it escalates to a direct confrontation with NATO, which it's on the verge of doing,
sure,
we vote out. We voted out. I mean, you're going to get a lot of people who are going to vote for someone like Donald Trump to avoid getting involved in international conflict.
So just a quick fact check. You said a moment ago that you brought up liberals that support guns. There are a lot of liberals that support guns.
Leftists and liberals are different.
Sure, fair enough. There are a lot of people on the left that support guns. When I watched the Republican primary debates a couple of days ago, sure seemed like the only person there that was not for funding Ukraine was Vivek. So I do think there's a lot of people with national security experience in the Republican Party that support what we're doing in Ukraine.
Yeah. Vivek, I believe, was staunchly opposed to it.
Yeah.
Nikki Haley, I think, was probably the most in favor of it.
Yeah. Mike Pence was very for it
Right.
as well. Yeah.
Nikki Haley was very, very much like boisterous. I mean, they all were in favor of U.S. intervention in Eastern Europe.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't you think their foreign policy experience might be why the right and the left are kind of agreeing on this at the top levels?
But the right and the left aren't agreeing on it. Yeah, Trump's position is anti the funding of Ukraine. His position is he stops the war overnight if he gets elected, whether that's true or not. He's got the majority of the Republican primary polling.
Sure.
So he's the clear favorite. To be fair, though, I mean, if you were to combine all of the other candidates polling, which is fairly pro, minus DeSantis and minus, DeSantis is a bit middle of the road, minus DeSantis and Vivek, you've probably got around, 28 to 30% GOP support for intervention in Ukraine. But I think if you actually do polling directly on U.S. involvement in Ukraine, it's lower than that in the Republican Party.
Yeah, I think that, what I find in my job, which is, running a PAC and doing a lot of polling and missions like that, I do find that Ukraine is not a top thing. And, one of the things I think people like you and I sometimes forget is we're tuned into this stuff 24/7. I subscribe to 5 newspapers. I watch every show I can all day on YouTube. Normal people are out there. They're thinking about drug prices. They're thinking about their house. They're thinking about inflation. They're not as focused on foreign policy as you and I are. And I think one of the reasons I think you're really wrong about the Biden administration, I think sometimes when I've watched your show, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, it's felt like you've characterized the Biden administration as eager or very happy to be supporting Ukraine. I think from the Biden administration's position, every single presidential administration since George Bush has wanted to do a pivot to Asia as far as our foreign policy. There's a whole world out there besides, the Middle East and Russia, and they've wanted to look at China, which I think both you and I would agree is an increasing threat to the national security of the United States. And I think when Putin invaded the Ukraine, I think there were a lot of people in the Biden administration that were thinking about the domestic agenda that they had really focused on, that they would be unable to really push forward as much as they believed because Vladimir Putin was going to be such a mission priority.
Yeah, if you go back to right before the transition, 2016 into 17 with Donald Trump, the Obama administration's position was that China is not the threat.
Right.
That was the conversation with Michael
right.
Flynn that
That's
Vladimir
right.
Putin was.
Yeah.
So I don't think the past administrations have. I mean, maybe they say they want to pivot to Asia, but if you take a look at the policies regarding the Middle East, Syria, Turkey, into Ukraine
Right.
and Europe,
Right.
with Russia and their gas monopoly and things, I think this is exactly where they want to be.
I think the United States feels forced into it. I mean, I think you and I would probably agree that our long stay in Afghanistan was a serious foreign policy mistake that frankly got friends of mine killed. There have been a lot of missteps in trying to withdraw from that region. My main point here is I feel like you've mischaracterized what the Biden administration wants to be focused on. I think this is something they feel forced to focus on.
And that's fine, but that's an opinion based on the assessment of facts.
Sure.
So if we're looking at a Biden administration that's put $250 billion into $250 billion, right, into Ukraine, to that conflict specifically, and if you take a look at the history going back to the 2000s with policy on Syria, the Qatar-Turkey pipeline, Gazprom, etc. They're doing exactly what they've been doing for the past several decades.
Yep. So I think this is where, I've watched your show. I know sometimes, like when Emma was on, you criticized her for not watching your show. I actually watched a lot of your show preparing for this. So I think one of the ways that I would differ with you is, I think generally speaking, directionally, when I've watched your show, I feel like you feel the United States is strongest when we withdraw from the world and we are not an active participant in geopolitics.
Well, I mean, hold on. Saying,
if I'm mischaracterizing you, please let me know.
Yeah, saying putting $250 billion into the Eastern European war front when we're not prioritizing, say, like lead pipes in Flint, Michigan, is
100%.
Right. So how about before we decide that we're going to fund Ukrainians in their war with Russia, not even a NATO nation or an EU nation, I mean, why don't we help the people in Newark, Pittsburgh, Flint, et cetera, who have lead in their pipes and their kids are dying? How about we get universal health care before we go to war?
Look, I'm 100% with you. There's no excuse for us having failed on that. Just as a fact check, it is factual that many of the weapons that we have sent to Ukraine were sitting here in the United States in warehouses. There was a huge cost to us keeping that and maintaining it. And many of them were scheduled for decommission anyway. And there's an under-discussed fact that in many ways we're getting rid of these things that we were going to have to take apart anyway. And there's a cost savings there. That said, I fully agree that we should be focused more on domestic policy in this country. I think if you look at the accomplishments of the Biden administration, the Inflation Reduction Act is clearly, his biggest accomplishment, right? It's not enough domestically.
What specifically in the Inflation Reduction Act would you point to?
Oh gosh, well, I think the fact that gas prices are, what is it, $1.80 less than their peak in 2022. I think a national unemployment rate of 3.5%. The United States is not the only country in the world that has dealt with inflation, but I think we have gotten it under control faster than other developed countries. I think it's been a good success.
I wonder, though, it's hard for me to give an assessment on that, considering COVID overlapped between the Trump administration and the Biden administration. So setting a metric on how much we've improved is difficult, considering COVID lockdowns.
I agree.
And then,
and just to add on to that, I think if the Biden administration continues to say the economy's good, more Americans are working than ever before. Can we swear on this show?
We try not to, but if you do, it's whatever.
We're effed if we continue down this path.
People don't feel that way. People feel like things are getting worse.
That's right.
And now you've got, I don't know exactly where we're at with the Fed raising interest rates, but it's getting quite alarming, in fact. And I'm wondering if, as student loans start kicking in, the people who haven't been paying over the past several years are not going to be able to start paying now.
I agree.
So it doesn't seem like, whatever the Inflation Reduction Act may do, I do think the name is one of those, right? They give these bills names to make it look like, Patriot Act or whatever.
Right.
But I'm quite concerned about where the economy goes, and I'm not an economist. I can see what the Fed is doing, and I can see how, you got two big indicators socially, which is like Michael Burry saying, or the reports that Michael Burry took a $1.6 billion short against the U.S. stock market.
Ooh,
and he's the guy from The Big Short.
Wow.
Right. And so I'm wondering if he's looking at it similarly to how the housing crisis happened, in that the government gives out student loans to people who don't have a career, and
Yeah.
there's no indication they'll be able to pay that money back.
Yeah.
And now with student loans kicking back in, we may be looking at something similar. Not the same, because I don't think they're doing student loan backed securities or anything like that. But when these people stop paying, there's going to be a hiccup, which is going to cause a serious issue. More importantly, to add to that, if young people can't buy houses,
Yeah.
then the housing market ceases to exist. I
Yeah.
mean, it's gonna plummet when we're looking at millennials into their mid to late 30s and they can't buy homes.
Yeah.
Then what do you do? I mean, the value of the house has to collapse.
Tim, I'm 100% there with you. I think one of the things I think the Biden administration has not communicated effectively, and certainly not solved, is two things: car prices and house prices. My husband and I, we were fortunate enough to buy our first house. God, what year was it? 2017, 2018. We got it for $600,000. That cost, my house has nearly doubled in value, right? In those
But is
years
it really
since.
doubled? You know
No,
what I mean?
it's
Right.
certainly not worth it. It is a mediocre, like my own realtor, when we bought it, called it a mediocre, forgettable, split level in Dedham, Massachusetts. It's just
Wow.
a normal house. Like, it's great.
Yeah.
I love owning a house, but it's not, a compound like you've got.
Yeah.
Just a normal house. And it's $1 million for most people out 20, 30 minutes outside Boston. That's crazy.
It's
That's
worth more
just-
than this.
No one, well, there you go. I mean, really, even with all the,
We're in the middle of nowhere.
yeah, this
So you
place
get-
is
you get-
really nice.
You get, yeah. To be fair though, this is also modular.
Yeah.
Right. This was just like hodgepodge, connect the dots
Yeah.
construction.
Yeah.
So the building that we're in, for those that are wondering, it's I think it's like 10,000 square feet.
Right. To come back to the point, though, rent, I really do believe that large data aggregation is one of the major factors. Rent in the United States has skyrocketed because you've got landlords using large data. There was a really good report that came out recently on this, talking about how they will figure out how to push the rent higher, 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 to the point people will actually pay it. And it's caused this huge skyrocket in rent all across the United
Yeah.
States. Additionally, I don't know if you follow the account Car Dealership Guy on Twitter. Really, really interesting person. He does a lot of data research into used car prices. I collect and restore old Porsches, so I love this account. And he's talking about how you've got used car dealerships just absolutely folding in Florida right now. The prices have gone through the roof. The inventory is down, and you've got even wholesale businesses that cannot make any money from this. The United States you have to have a car to get around, and just normal people are priced out of it. This is not tenable.
It's a house of cards.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's why Michael Burry's betting against it, because the value of something is what someone's willing to pay for it.
Right.
And what we have now is people are looking at houses and cars and they're saying, well, if they're selling it for this price, I'm going to sell it for this price. And then people don't buy it.
Right.
And, so interestingly, at the same time, inventory is low.
Yeah.
we went to go look at used car because we have guest transportation, and we go to these dealerships and they're like, we have 2 vehicles available. I'm like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
We had to go to like 5 different dealerships until we could find something. We ended up buying one, and I'll spare the auto manufacturer, but it was a piece of garbage we lost a ton of money on because it kept breaking, and we're struggling to find a vehicle. Prices are through the roof. It's crazy. And we're a company that can afford to do this. I don't understand how whatever the system is
Yeah.
persists as it is. You look at things like Uber, with how many people, you're not making a living doing Uber.
That's right.
The cost of wear and tear on your vehicle, you're probably making a couple bucks. I think New York Times said it was like a couple bucks an hour. After you pay for your gas, you pay for your brakes, your tires, and all the damage to your car. And then the intrinsic value of the car is decreasing because you're driving it too much.
Right.
But there are people who think this is short-term cash.
Right.
So all of that, especially with housing markets, oh man, don't get me started on like Airbnbs and everything.
I hope this is not doxing anything, so you can edit this out if it is.
Well, it's live, so.
If you come to Tim's house, he has a beautiful 1980s Pontiac Fiero in the driveway. So
That's my
please,
brother's.
You got to fix that thing up, man.
Oh,
This
my
is the
brother's got 2.
I know, it's gorgeous. This is the car in Fast and Furious that went to space. So
Oh, wow.
please, if I ever come back here, I will go help your brother in the driveway. We will get that thing running. You can pick me.
Oh, they
up
run.
on that next
I
time.
think one is like, he's got 2. One's green, one's red, and
It's
one's
so gorgeous.
One's perfectly
Oh my
fixed up.
God, that's a great
Yeah.
car.
But well, let's do this. Let's we agree on a lot. Let's talk about where the disagreement comes in and how the concern, I suppose, is as tensions escalate in this country
Yeah.
in scary ways. Many people believe it all started with the first big battle of the culture, whatever you want to call it. You mentioned you were a 4-star general. Is Gamergate.
Yes. Retired. Yes.
Yeah, Gamergate is really interesting, especially the differing views on what it was. So maybe we'll start with that and we'll quickly move forward. I don't know if you wanted to chime in.
I've talked too much. Why don't you go, Alex?
So, God, Gamergate is not something that you can simply you can't simply describe it. It's too
amorphous, vague.
I would say so.
Nebulous.
Well, not so much vague. It's just there are clashing narratives about what it is. On one side, you've got people that were fighting a fight for better transparency, better ethics in games journalism and the gaming industry as a whole, less nepotism, so on and so forth. And on the other side, you've got people who say, no, this movement is any kind of ethical concerns they have is a smokescreen, and what they're actually about is harassing women and minorities and trying to get them out of the gaming sphere, anti-progressive, if you want to call it that.
So I've heard those visions of it. Did you have a different view?
I think so. I think it was very bifurcated. We're friends, I think, after 10 years. I truly believe you ran the Gamergate subreddit. It's something I had some issues with, but I truly do believe you personally were in it to because of some concerns about journalism. I know you yourself went to J school, and this is your focus. I believe you when you say that. I think the outcome of Gamergate is actually a lot wider. It was the start of how we now argue online. And Tim, I want to bring this back to you and ask you a really honest question. So with my current job, I work with Cenk Uygur. I've gotten to know a lot of people in this space. Destiny, I know you're friends with him.
He's great.
He's a really good person. And a commonality that I see as I get to know people in this space is all of us carry a certain level of, I think trauma is too strong a word, but you get screamed at all the time by everyone taking the worst possible interpretation of everything you say. And I think it damages every single public figure out there on the right and the left. I had a conversation with Lauren Southern about this a few days ago. This is just, it's a commonality. And I think at its core, Gamergate was the start of this really destructive personal way that we argue online, where if you don't like somebody, you go into their past and you find stuff they've said that you disagree with, and you get a mob together and attack, climp chip it, put anything you've set up that's stupid on subreddit, and you destroy the person. And that's my core message to you, man, is look, my hands are covered with blood in this, as much as anyone's can be. I've come to the conclusion that this is a war and a tactic that does not do anything but lead us into misery. And I think if you're serious about the issues we're talking about, I think the only sane thing for people to do that truly care is to get off Twitter and talk about public policy. Just one more thing. If I could go back in time for Gamergate and do something different, I would have deleted my damn account, and I would have taken that moment where Intel was putting up $100 million to help women in tech initiatives. And I would have spent all that effort behind the damn scenes trying to get game companies to commit to getting over this hiring bias that they do have in the game industry. That would have been 1 trillion times more constructive. It would have led to actual changes in the game industry. And now as we find the labor conditions in the game industry are an S show, no matter if you're male, female, whatever, like it would have helped set a standard that would benefit everyone today. I got caught up in something that was, I understand why I did it, but it was not productive. And this is what I'm trying to tell people. We've got to focus more on policy and less at screaming at each other.
I agree with the screaming at each other, but I disagree only somewhat on policy. I think culture matters more than anything. Politics,
of course it does.
Politics being downstream from that.
Sure.
And so when it comes to issues of the internet, you do have, there are grifters. Grifters exist. They exist to generate attention, and they put out things that are fundamentally false or mischaracterizations with the intention of generating traffic, making money. It's not just politics, though, right? So I talked about Nikocado Avocado yesterday. Are you all familiar with him?
I apologize.
Nikocado Avocado was a thin man 6 years ago who was doing what's called mukbang.
Oh, the fat video you tweeted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's a video that was tweeted out by an account called Clown World showing a thin man and woman and then a fat man and woman. For clarification, the woman is not the same person. Right. She's a cyclist. She's fit and exercise and all that stuff. But this is a similar phenomenon that people embrace something that generates revenue and traffic.
Yeah.
And then they keep exacerbating it and getting crazier and crazier with it until you have a guy who is morbidly obese riding around on a mobility scooter, but using that to generate revenue. So after there were serious concerns about this dude's well-being, because he started gaining massive amounts of weight, there was like a conversation saying, you need to stop doing this.
Right.
Instead, he's put out videos of him riding a mobility scooter and smashing his chin and embracing the morbid obesity because it generates, my presumption is, he is playing into the role that gets him traffic, the shock content. His videos went from hundreds of thousands as a thin man eating food to millions now as too morbidly obese. And I got to tell you, man, you look at the comments on his latest video, there was that woman. She's grunting and making noises as she stirs noodles. And I'm like, this is not content where it's like a food taste test.
Right.
This is not Gordon Ramsay saying like, I really like the salting. This is some kind of like a fetishist content where they want to hear the man and the woman grunt and groan while they eat food. And then they embrace the vice, I suppose. That's just, I don't want to just go too much into that, but my point is that happens in every genre, you name it. Every space, be it gaming, movies, food, cards, politics, people are constantly looking for the next thing that will get them more traffic to embrace, to push, and to become.
Yeah. So 2 things here. I think something you and I have in common, I hope this is okay to say. I've seen clips of you where you were heavier. I've certainly faced the same thing. I put on, when I was running for office, 120 pounds. That was very difficult to take off, right? So I think it's fair. I think there's a way to talk about issues like weight gain with love and compassion, because I do think it's the best way to live your best life. You want to be healthy. That said, if someone's destroying themselves, that is, I'm just libertarian enough to believe that is a choice they can make. What I am far more worried about is I think there's a huge cottage industry that has exploded since Gamergate on all sides. I think it's primarily on the right, but we certainly have actors on the left that do this. They essentially produce political pornography. And what I mean by this is they aim directly at their readers' basest instincts, and they tell them exactly what they want to hear. And it's very often couched in the politics of just destroying people, treating your enemy as inhuman. And I think this really deeply harms our country.
I don't think it's unique to any one side. I think the industry exists on the left and the right. And I think people on the right would say it's the left doing this every day. And people on the left would say it's a problem of the right. When in reality, as CGP Grey described it, he had a video, I don't know if you've seen it, called this, what is it called? This Video Will Make You Angry or something, where he explains that no one in these spaces are talking to each other.
Yeah.
They're talking within their group about the other.
Right.
Which means the only thing you're likely going to hear is the worst thing that your rival faction has done or your rival tribe. And there's very little conversation about the good things or the merits of what they're describing.
Don't you think you've played a role in that, though?
In what way?
Well, Tim, I haven't watched every video you've ever put out, but I watched a fair sampling of your last week. I could not find one credible example of you saying something nice about the left. I think your guests, generally speaking, tilt far to the right. You have you're doing an event soon with Donald Trump Jr., that's fine, that's your right. But I think my message respectfully to you is I think you've played a role in this culture war. And I think it's bad.
No question.
I think it's very bad for our country.
So how do we get Cenk Uygur to come on the show?
Just call him.
He doesn't. He said no.
Did he really?
Yeah, and not only that, but he lied about me, insulted me, and so did Anna. And so we're talking with Anna because she's welcome here.
Sure.
Kyle Kalinske is a cool dude, and he's actually, I've talked to him for quite a bit about this stuff. I'm actually a big fan, and he said, yeah, we'll figure it out. I'm not going to drag anybody for having a show and not canceling their show to come on my show. That's ridiculous. Sure. So for Cenk, Kyle, Hassan Piker agreed to come on at one point. DM'd me, this was during COVID, and said, I just don't think I can travel because there's concerns of COVID. I said, totally fair. and later went on to say that he won't do my show.
Yeah.
Then Sam Cedar, of course, is the best example of duplicitousness, and I think Majority Report is the epitome of what you've described. That is not to say that no one on the right does anything similar, but I view the Majority Report as like political WWE.
There we go. My favorite show, Majority Report.
Yeah, I think their whole game, their mission is exactly as you described, to take things out of context, manipulate them, to satiate their viewers' basest instincts or whatever. So, a couple examples is I was critical of David Pakman and then apologized for this because I said, wow, he's got so many videos about Trump. And then I was like, oh, I mean, we do too, right?
Sure.
We should reflect on that. We're both talking about high level politics. I can respect that. I've known David for a decade, longer than that. You look at Sam Cedar and his Majority Report, their videos are all about people. It's about Dave Rubin. It's about me. It's not about high level politics or policy. It is the basis of social conflict and complaints. The example that I often give, which exemplifies this, is we put out a song, totally apolitical song, hit the Billboard charts, did really well. Carter actually over here produced it. And when they played it on their show, they played it in such a way. I don't understand.
I don't agree with what you're about to say, but please proceed. Actually.
Right. So
I don't agree. That's
if you
what
listen to it,
happens.
they played it in such a way that the quality was dramatically reduced. And then they said it sounded like Nickelback. Two things. Yes, sure. If you play it at low quality and say it sounds bad, but the song's actually masterfully done. They say it sounds like Nickelback. Well, that's nonsense. The genre of the song we produce is closer to emo,
Sure.
and not modern rock. They're saying things with the goal of riling up their base to generate revenue.
Okay. So first of all, I have been a majority, like Sam's my dude. I have watched Majority Report since the Bush administration. He kept me sane. I was living in Mississippi during the Bush administration, and the only voice saying anything sane about the Iraq War, which you agreed with back then, I do believe.
The Iraq War? Agreed.
With not supporting the Bush administration being terrible.
I'm still opposed to most intervention.
I'm so horrified by that. Was Sam Cedar and frankly Cenk Uygur, right? So what I think you get wrong about Majority Report is they do roughly a 2.5 hour show every single day. The first hour of it, it is bringing in experts on inflation and housing and professors,
I know that. And I agree with that.
It is honestly the smartest hour of any show that exists. Like, this is why I subscribe. I'm very proud to help support the show financially. I agree that the fun half is, it's
the epitome of what you've described as what's choking us out.
I don't think it always is. I think it's sketches with comedians. I think they bring on people like Digby, Heather Pardon, who you should definitely invite on the show, Andy Kimmler. I do think they go after Dave Rubin, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm not above enjoying those segments, and I have laughed my ass off when they've gone after you. But I think that it is. I think it is done in a smart way, and I think I don't think it's political pornography.
What we don't do is, very few people I would insult. It typically is reserved for people in Congress and corporations, people who are doing things that are egregious and evil. But like Cenk Uygur, what I try to do? I ignore most of his opinions I disagree with on X/Twitter, because there's no point in me just like quoting him or something. But when we agree, I'll quote him.
Sure.
It's fascinating. We'll bring them. The Young Turks is a good example of this. I made a video in agreement with Hassan Piker. And I went through a whole bunch of issues in which he was right about, he was talking about Mr. Beast. And then Hassan responded insulting me and mocking me.
Yeah.
I made a video where I looked over 5 different studies that talked about something called attractiveness privilege. And it's conservatives tend to be more attractive than liberals. And the reason being, if you grow up attractive, things are easier for you. You tend to then associate the success you've had with you being good at something.
Right.
And so it's often overlooked that if you look like Brad Pitt, more doors get open for you.
Sure.
This results in conservatives being more independent, small government minded, and then it's partly due to attractiveness. For liberals, they tend to be on the lower scale, the back end of attraction. This is multiple studies. It was a Washington Post article that talked about this. And because they faced barriers due to appearance and things like that, they tend to favor more collectivist policies. The response from the Young Turks was to call me ugly, post pictures of me, and insult me, even though I was right. And then in the conclusion of their segment, they said, he is right. The studies do say this, but he's ugly anyway. What was the point of that?
I didn't see the segment, so I can't
I don't
speak
do
to
that.
the veracity.
I'm not going to insult Anna's looks or anything like that.
It's not a way I would behave in my public life. I do want to, so two things, and I want to come back to Sam and the Majority Report. What I find really frustrating about Cenk's public reputation is I've worked with Cenk for 5 years now. Cenk is he is literally the best boss I've ever had, in the sense that he listens to problems, he raises millions for the Democrats, gets no credit for it whatsoever, is always trying to do constructive things for the party in back channel. There's no person I've ever worked with ever in any industry that hires as many strong women to surround himself with and truly listens to them and respects them, and just is, even as a friend, is always there if you've had a bad day to listen to them. And it's just mind-boggling to me, because the reputation of Cenk is this, like, jackass, frankly. And it's just not the guy I work with at all. And, so I think that you're wrong about Cenk. And I think if you look directionally at the totality of his work, I think you would see he's someone that is truly trying to build
What am I
things.
wrong about, though?
I think you think he's just someone who's trying to go after you individually. Right?
No, I think he's as you described, the
Yeah.
culture war. Somebody who is saying what needs to be said because it generates revenue. And
man.
I'll give you another example. Something called the Alternative Influencer Report came out. This was back in, I think, like 2018. It was essentially a fictitious document that had a bunch of nodes, like the conspiracy theory things where people tie ribbons to each other.
Yeah.
In this, for instance, they said that Chris Raygun, a game content creator, today rather apolitical, was directly linked to Richard Spencer.
Okay.
They drew a line directly between a guy who talks about video games and quite literally the most prominent white nationalist at the time. Right smack dab in the middle of it was me, connected to everybody. And they connected me to people I'd never met before. They connected me to people like Stephen Molyneux I'd never even spoken a word to or spoken about. And so when this report comes out, it instantly gets picked up by a whole bunch of mainstream corporate publications. It's absurdly false in its premise. The Young Turks produced a segment where they used an image with my name right in the middle about the influencer network of the far right or whatever. Me actually knowing Anna and Cenk, having been on their show several times, DMing with them. The last time I saw Cenk Uygur, he walked up to me, we shook hands, says, how's it been? How's it been going? Everything good? I'm at Politicon, and I see Cenk standing in a hallway. And I walk up, I was like, hey, how's it going, man? And he's like, hey. And I was like, I sent you a message about that video you produced where you put me in this thing about like Richard Spencer or whatever. And I was like, you never responded. So what does Cenk do? Starts screaming in my face at the top of his lungs.
Okay.
It's filmed by multiple film crews. And I just went, why are you yelling at me? And then he started screaming about Donald Trump and about the right. And I can't remember exactly what was said. And then he stormed off, went in a room where I was told I wasn't allowed to go in.
Wow.
And that was the last physical interaction I've had with the man. And since then, we've only ever invited the likes of all of these prominent left personalities. They won't come on the show.
Sure.
They don't want to engage in these conversations, but they absolutely love to take things I've said out of context or just make videos insulting me.
Sure.
So I'm not going to speak for anybody on the right, but I can tell you, I agree with you about the culture war. And I see you've got people like Ben Shapiro, who you can say he's wrong for days, but he doesn't do these things either.
Yeah.
He sat down with Anna and she agreed to sit down with him.
It was a great interview.
And he tries to have these conversations. The Young Turks don't do it. Hassan Piker won't do it.
Well, Young Turks is not the same as Hassan. He's
Well,
his own man.
Sam Cedar sets us up for drama and
I think you're completely wrong about that.
I published
have
the
to
DMs.
say. I read it. Oh,
And-
I'm
and he-
embarrassed
and-
to say how many times I've read it.
And he agreed to come on the show.
Yeah.
He agreed to us covering travel and accommodations.
Y'all
He gave us a
had a
date.
breakdown in communication, Tim.
Sure.
I swear to
So-
God. Hold on.
So then he made a bunch of videos about it.
Yeah.
Lying.
Yeah.
And then we just carried on and said nothing.
Tim, is there a Bible around here? I will put my hand on the Bible and swear to Christ Almighty that I've read those DMs at least 10 times. And it is my honest interpretation. Y'all he's not lying at all. He is open, he is honest, and he's reached out. Hold on.
Then why did he make rage-bait content with it?
Out to you 1,000 times after that, is willing to come on your show.
Why make multiple rage bait videos? I'm not going to entertain that. If when Hassan told me publicly on Twitter he would come on the show, and then the same exact tweet that I put out saying we try to get people on the left to come on the show and talk to us, Hassan said I'm game or something to that effect. I DM'd him. He said let's figure it out. He then responded and said I'm actually concerned about traveling right now due to COVID, and I said no worries, man. I really appreciate you reaching out.
Yeah.
Sam decided to turn it into rage bait content and persist in his endeavor to use this.
It just seems to me, if I can be here today and be sitting down with one of the Gamergate mods, someone, like, I know you did not do this, but the Gamergate movement sent me quite a lot of death threats, rape threats, made my life terrible, hacked my bank account, really, really, really disrupted my life. If I can let that go, and there was a Washington Post article about me trying to forgive Gamergaters and move forward, like, maybe you should, like, you're clearly, I'm not saying you're wrong to be upset about these things, and I truly understand. I've been the target of these kinds of shows as well. But, the truth is we've got to find a way to live together in this country and move forward. So I think, I genuinely think, maybe have your producer, Lisa, she's a lovely person, talk to Sam, set some ground rules, leave personal stuff out of it. Just talk to him like an adult. Let that go. I have they sent me letters, dude, talking about cutting my skin off my body and boiling it and feeding it to me.
And we've been swatted 15 times. We had the bomb squad sent out
horrible.
Here.
It's terrible. We are public figures, right?
Yep.
And if we can't move forward, I just don't know where we are as a country.
Well, we can move forward, right? So despite the things, say, like Anna said about me, or actually, to be fair, I'm not, I think it may have been Anna and Nando Villa, which is really funny because I know Nando as well, and I've no beef with them, and I'm just confused as to why they're making a video insulting me because I was reading a Washington Post article that was deemed true by them. Jen screamed in my face in a shocking way that I was confused. I had the BBC come to me and said, "What just happened?" And they interviewed me about it. And I was like, I have no idea. But the thing with Sam Cedar, if you look at like the Ethan Klein, Steven Crowder bit, it's a clown show.
It's not.
And I understand that they talk policy and they talk about these things, but you can't come in here and be like, the fact that people are doing these things and making a spectacle and, having each other at their throats, we can't do things like that. It's like, well, Sam Cedar is the epitome of that. You can criticize a lot of people on the right who do similar things, but Sam is it masquerades as fact content, which it has a decent amount of, that's fine, but it is WWE. It is, when they come in here, they intentionally, look at Emma, right? What did she say when she came in here? Why do you think your show influences neo-Nazis to get mass murders or something like that? Which is an outright fabrication and a manipulation.
And then you called her a pedophile after the show.
Well, that's in response to her saying that there should be books explaining scat and sexual activities to minors. When we discussed a teacher who was actually had the police called on her because she was talking to 10-year-olds about how to use Grindr, and Emma said that she supports that. I said, the only assumption we can make if someone wants children to learn how to use Grindr is that they have proclivities towards children.
Okay. I hear you, man. I genuinely hear you. What I think I would like to propose is, I can't speak for Cenk, but I bet, I think there's a good chance if you talk to him, he would consider coming on the show today.
Look, if he's busy and he hosts his own show, I'm not gonna. That's why I don't go on Twitter. I'm like, Cenk's avoiding. No, it's ridiculous. Like, the dude's probably busier than I am.
So who are you willing to put like past grievances aside with? Like,
quite literally.
Yeah.
Well, I have no.
Sam, not Cenk.
Cenk's welcome on the show anytime.
Okay.
We invite him incessantly. I DM him. I'm like, bro, we want you on the show.
So it's just the majority report.
And it's not personal. It's more like if I'm engaging, if I'm going to play basketball, and someone asks me to come and play basketball, I am not going to go play on the Washington Generals or the Harlem Globetrotters. That's not actually playing the game. Now, if you want to put on a show where the Generals slip, fumble, and then there's like, it's entertaining for people as the guy spins the ball on his finger. That's what people are into. They're allowed to be into it. The majority report is more like WWE. The Young Turks is
It's
more.
not. It is the smartest hour on in the leftist universe. It just is.
Sam has, look, it's not even my personal opinion.
Sure.
Everyone in the industry, including Sam, knows he's blacklisted for this.
Who has blacklisted him?
Sam Cedar is blacklisted.
No, who in the right-wing ecosphere has...
Right-wing? No, I'm talking about mainstream. I'm talking about corporate
who
platforms.
Specifically? Because you've made this allegation multiple times. I would like to know who.
So I'm not going to bring up Sam's personal beefs with other shows, but Sam has talked about it on his own show.
Sure.
He knows. And it is not my place to come say, hey, this person has explicitly said these things for a variety of reasons. I am not going to get involved in the WWE of Sam Cedar. I'm going to explain my position. But by all means, when Emma was on the show, she outright admitted they know exactly what I'm talking about.
I didn't get that impression, but okay.
She said yes.
Yeah.
I asked her, that Sam's blacklisted from various shows, and she said, of course. And it's because they're scared to debate Sam, or whatever her opinion was.
Right.
And that's fine. You can believe he's blacklisted for whatever reason, but I can tell you explicitly some of the biggest podcasts in the political space have outright said that the dude, Sam, will have, like, I'll use this example as the perfect example. When Emma, in the middle of conversation, abruptly said, why do you think your show inspired a neo-Nazi mass shooter? Mm-hmm. That thing right there is why people be like, scratch this guy's name off the books. He's not welcome on this show.
Okay.
Because that was what she did was a lie intended to generate shock content WWE garbage.
As a matter, so I don't agree with her assessment, to be clear, but the factual basement of what she was talking about is there was a mass shooter, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong here, and they were found to be a really big fan of your show.
That's a lie.
That is not true?
That is not true.
Okay.
And so why bring that up without doing any... It's shock WWE content. Okay. But I'll tell you exactly what it was. The guy in Texas had 4 screenshots of one episode where one guest had said a specific thing. The screenshot in question was quoting a specific thing said by one time a guest. Sure. To then come out and say that your show did this thing when this individual simply posted 4 screenshots of one guy is exactly the issue with the Majority Report. The disingenuous... WWE style shot content.
It is so good. It's such a good show, man.
I feel like if you're someone who watches, say, I'll give you another example, and I'll throw some critique at David Pakman. Chuck Todd had, who did he have on? Ted Cruz. Mm-hmm. And this is a couple years ago. He asked Ted Cruz, do you think Ukraine interfered in the U.S. elections? And Ted Cruz's response was, Politico and the New York Times reported that. A producer then starts laughing and can be heard being picked up in the audio on NBC. David Pakman gleefully just laughs along with it. Mm-hmm. That right there, if you are someone who watches that content uncritically, you are grossly misinformed. And if you're watching things like that...
Do I seem like someone grossly misinformed?
You may be misinformed in certain areas, but I'm not, based on our conversation, I'm not here to accuse you of knowing or not knowing. I'm saying, if you're watching the Majority Report, and they run a segment where they're being disingenuous.
Sure.
I don't watch the Majority Report. But an example being Emma, they did a segment about her saying, why did your show inspire this person?
Right.
Well, that's lying to people and manipulating the space. And if you're trying to convince people that because one crazy person posted 4 screenshots that my show had anything to do with that, these are the people who are making the culture war worse and fanning the flames of violence.
I don't think that's true. I've never heard Majority Report say anything.
No, it's stochastic terrorism.
Hold on. Let me have my say. This is important, and your listeners deserve a response to this. I've never heard the Majority Report say anything that I thought would be like supporting violence.
No, it's stochastic terrorism.
I have seen your show like promote some things, like you yourself have said civil war. There's a civil war coming. We're in the middle of a civil war. So I think if there's anyone in this situation that is advocating violence and stochastic terrorism, I think respectfully, you would be the party I think would have done that much more than Majority.
So me, for instance, quoting a news article is inciting violence, you're saying?
I think that this is my issue with, and this is, I didn't come here today to adjudicate the beef between you and Sam. This is what I wanted to say to you, Tim. I understand that you are going to vote for Donald Trump. in 2024. That you're right. I wholly support that. I respect you for it, right? You thought your way into the position. That's democracy. We've got to work our butts off and beat you at the ballot box. I don't worry about losing an election to your audience as much as I worry about you convincing your audience that the Justice Department is crooked and the FBI is crooked and their local police department is crooked and the elections are crooked and that there's no point to believing in American democracy or
When have I ever said
fighting
any
for
of
it.
those things?
I think
So you got to slow down there.
I think directionally speaking, this is the message of your show.
So let's go back to say
sure.
like, elections are crooked.
Yeah.
That's probably a technicality in which I've said elections.
It's a technicality.
Yeah, sure. Let's
Okay.
explain. Elections have never been this: two guys stand up, say, "I have position A, I have position B," and then everyone smiles and shakes hands.
Sure.
Elections have always been dirty politics, ads that take quotes out of context. But I've never said that the elections are unwinnable or that there's no point. In fact, I said quite the opposite. Since Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden, I have even argued to Steve Bannon's face, he is wrong about how Donald Trump lost. Donald Trump lost because people voted against him. And there are people who think Joe Biden could not have gotten those votes. And I'm like, he didn't get those votes. They were anti-Donald Trump votes.
Okay.
This is what everything the media had said up until the 2020 election, is that the famous article, I think it was Atlantic, "Stay alive, Joe Biden, we just need your corporeal form."
Okay, so let's do this one at a time. Your audience deserves this. So it's your statement today. You believe Joe Biden won 2020 fair, like it was a free and fair election. You were on record saying that?
There's a lot to break down on what you mean by free and fair, but I believe that Joe Biden got more votes than Donald Trump.
Directionally.
Joe Biden got more votes than Donald Trump, and then there's the nuance of policy procedure and what people would argue is free and fair is what's at question. What's not at question is I do not believe China mass printed votes or that Dominion was flipping things or any of that stuff. What matters is that through a overwhelmingly legal strategy and process, Democrats ran an election strategy which resulted in Joe Biden beating Donald Trump.
Okay. Can you delineate that a little bit more? What specifically do you mean?
So an article was published in Time magazine called "The Shadow Campaign to Save the Election." Are you familiar with it?
No.
Let's pull this one up. This one breaks down exactly what the more moderate Trump supporters believe is cheating, or what they would say is rigged. Obviously, you have the more egregious Dominion doing these things. This is nonsense. In this article that came out...
wait. Obviously, you have the more egregious Dominion doing things?
Right, you have conspiracy theorists saying that Chinese ballots were made or something like that.
Bullshit.
Right, it's nonsense. Complete and utter nonsense. And it actually distracts from the actual issues conservatives and Republicans would have to address if they want to win, which is Democrats masterfully played policy and procedure to the extent that they could, resulting in victories.
I got bad news for you, man. Every single modern presidential election has a team that looks at the legal strategy.
Exactly.
With this.
And that's
Trump did.
That's why
Bush
I said
did.
I completely
do you
agree.
remember Bush winning in 2020?
Right.
2000
and that's
against
exactly
Gore?
why I said no election has ever been two people standing up saying, "Here are my beliefs," and then people just shake hands and
How
agree.
is this a bad thing? You have jurisprudence. You have people working
but
the legal. Hold on.
But I didn't say it
working
was.
through the legal department in every single state,
Right.
and coming to this. Now, I think if you want to go back to 2000 and look at like the Miami-Dade County and some of the ways Bush won in 2000, I think there was some really like Catherine Harris and all of that.
We're in
back
agreement.
then. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but this is the legal process
Agreed.
playing out.
And the Democrats played it masterfully.
But the
and they won.
Republicans, everyone does this. This is just
yes.
elections.
And the Trump team did it poorly, and so he loses.
because he's incompetent.
Among many things, the people around him that he hired were abysmal. But in this article, for instance, this gets to the core of what we mean by free and fair elections. The average person you probably ask who is a Trump supporter is probably not going to say the election was stolen because China did X or Venezuela or Germany or whatever.
Right.
What they're going to say is, here you go, an article about which includes Facebook putting in $500 million in funding to influence policy, executives of states changing voting law without approval of state legislature. These are things that Republicans say, hey, you're playing dirty.
Hold on, say that last part again.
So one of the issues that was, this is Texas v. Pennsylvania, that the judiciary or the executive of various states changed election law without the approval of the legislature. The Constitution.
But if that's the process,
it's not.
That
The Constitution.
state.
The Constitution says that the state legislatures have final say on how elections are conducted. but through judicial rulings, certain things end up getting changed.
That's jurisprudence, man.
And I'm not saying they're wrong to have done it. I'm saying Republicans will argue that's playing dirty. My response is you lost. Trump lost.
But don't
you guys
think
could have
that
done the exact same thing.
Don't you think that that's deliberately confusing the issue for your audience?
What, breaking down and explaining how the elections work?
I think they're, it's the way
like we're not disagreeing at all. You're acting like we are.
Well, I think we are, or at least this is my disagreement with you. I think there are ways to talk about, here's one. An issue I really care a lot about is cybersecurity and elections. This is huge.
Yeah,
this is something I care a ton about. We have, 50 states, a ton of territories, individual counties in every single state, different voting systems, different operating systems, different voting machines.
Proprietary code that the public can't see.
Not open source.
Yeah.
Should flatly be illegal.
Agreed.
This is a huge issue. There's a way to talk about that calmly and rationally that doesn't mislead the American people into thinking that, say China has hacked into our voting machines.
I despise that
and
narrative.
Altered the results. I think my critique of your show, respectfully, would be, I think there's a sleight of hand that leads your audience to frequently believe that our Justice Department is broken. That our elections are broken.
When did the Justice Department get fixed?
The Justice Department is an imperfect thing that has many successes, but and failures as well. Hold on. This is important. So in the middle of Gamergate, I worked directly with the Eric Holder Justice Department trying to get some of the highest profile death threats on my life prosecuted. Plainly illegal, had multiple calls with the White House about this. The Justice Department personally failed me. Mm-hmm. So I've got my own beefs here. But I think directionally, if you look at who works at the Justice Department, it tends to be career prosecutors that are not partisan, that are there trying to do the best they can. And I do believe, I think Sean would agree with me, our mutual friend Sean, actual justice warrior, that the United States does have directionally one of the better justice systems in the entire world.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean the DOJ is not broken. I mean,
what is broken in your mind?
Let's talk about, I don't know, like Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X. Let's go back in time and talk about, you got that really great meme about the CIA, which I also think very much applies to the FBI, that we know they've done crooked things in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s.
Yeah.
There's been no serious reforms, but don't worry, everything's okay now.
We've
nonsense.
Nicaragua, Chile,
the list goes on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very much busted.
There's no one in this room, I think, today that would not strongly argue that the United States has not made immense foreign policy missteps.
Right.
But I think directionally, if you look at the work of the Justice Department, I do think these are honest professionals trying to do the best. And just one more thing on this. This is a complaint I have about the left, too. Because something I deal with so often is people that just believe automatically like every police officer is corrupt or crooked and we just need to be like they're all evil. And I think about my conservative friend Connor, Counterpoints on Twitter. Y'all should follow him. Yeah, he was telling me the other day about how when he was a cop, he got paid $40,000 a year to wrestle crackheads to the ground every other day. It's
not
a terrible job. So I think that I wish that we could reframe the ways that we talk about these issues as constructive instead of destructive. I think destructive is talking about the Justice Department as if it's crooked, it's in the bag against Trump. I think constructive is to look at the situations like Martin Luther King to talk about reforming it within the system and make sure those excesses do not happen again.
We'll wrap up the election point, and there has never been a point in which I have advocated for or even defended in any way. In fact, I've become triggered in the people trying to maintain these absurd narratives to the point of anger when they would say things like the real inauguration date is March 11th,
right,
and then it doesn't happen. And then the most annoying thing about the whole fraud narrative is that Trump comes out right after the election saying it was stolen from me, convincing his voters not to vote in Georgia. And then you end up with Warnock winning.
I'm so
because
glad
of
to
voter.
hear you say this. Thank
but this
you,
has
Tim.
always been my position. And so this is the frustrating thing about political commentary on the left. nonprofit organizations that profit off of lying about what my position is. We have Steve Bannon in this room sitting down, and I
passed a picture of him on the way.
That's right.
Yeah.
Signed. And I say to him, you are wrong about fraud. Democrats have activists who go on the ground and knock on doors. They have lawyers like Mark Elias. They outplayed you in every way through a legal process. And the Trump supporters got mad that they were outplayed.
So
but
if
that's
you
an election.
feel this way, why are you out here? Because I watched multiple clips of you before this show, and you're talking about how like the prosecutions against Trump by the Department of Justice in multiple states, like what's her name, Franny
Fani Willis.
Talking about her in Georgia, how as if she is out here doing something that's underhanded or wrong, was just Trump meeting the fate.
Why was
he
Jenna
decided.
Ellis indicted?
Why was she indicted?
Yeah.
For an election, well, allegedly because of this election conspiracy.
What are the specific counts she was indicted on?
I can't speak to
And
Jenna
that's
Ellis
and that's a
specifically.
serious issue. So
Sure.
the issue with Fani Willis is that she indicted lawyers who did nothing. She indicted members of the Trump administration who
How
did
do you
nothing.
know that?
I read the indictment. Jenna Ellis is charged on counts 1 and 2, simply being part of a criminal conspiracy and solicitation to a public official to violate their oath of office. Why? Because she provided legal counsel to Trump. That's it. She's not charged on there's 30 some odd counts, 1 and 2 only for Jenna Ellis. And the question is, if you go to a lawyer and you say, what should I do here? And they provide you legal advice, to say that's a conspiracy is insane. More importantly, one of the Republicans indicted in Georgia, he was indicted because he was working with what's called an alternate slate of electors, which this country has always had, particularly
dude.
1961. 1961. There
You're
was
talking about the thing to go up to Mike Pence with the list of fake electors? You think that's a legit tactic?
No, I'm saying that a guy, a Republican, went to a group of Republicans who were running an election to be electors. He told the press, this group exists in the event we win a lawsuit. For example, are you familiar with the election of 1960?
I'm not, man.
And so this is a big problem. So if you sit here and say Fani Willis didn't do anything wrong, it's absurd, but you don't understand the historical context of what an alternate elector is and how they operate. Knowing the election of 1960, I'll tell you exactly what happened. Hawaii went Republican. It was certified Republican. The Democrats convened an alternate slate of, as you described, fake electors and delivered the fake electors to the electoral vote count. Richard Nixon, as vice president, said, I am not going to count the certified vote. I'm going to choose the Democrat vote. Does anyone oppose? They did not, and it was chosen. Now, you can argue that shouldn't be done. You can argue that the Republicans should not have done it. But it's not a crime to say that the process of the Constitution requires there be electors in the event a lawsuit is won in court.
Okay.
That's in fact the only way it could be done.
Multiple things here. The first thing is, Trump is facing, I don't
94.
care about Jenna Ellis as much as I care about Trump, right? There are multiple indictments in multiple states. Trump is the person I care about. And I think it's worth saying, like, we haven't had a chance to really talk about Ukraine policy yet, but, like when Donald Trump went in, like January 6th happened, like this was like just roll the credits for Vladimir Putin on like seeing the United States destroy itself. Like this was his wildest
absolutely.
dream. Well, you had
China as
Jackson Hinkle on here to just put forward pro-Kremlin propaganda. Coming back to this was a tremendously dark day for the United States. I do think Donald Trump played a role. It's not like there's no evidence. Anyone out there can listen to him like saying that clip. I just need you to go find me X number of votes. That phone call of Brad Ratzberger.
I'm gonna pause real quick.
Please.
I think we're running into an issue that is common
Sure.
of people who come on this show, and it's that I don't think you actually read the stuff.
Did I sit down, read every single indictment for the 5
Not the
states?
indictment.
Yeah.
Did you read the conversation between Raffensperger and Trump that led to the I just need you to find the votes?
I listened to that entire clip multiple
So
times.
what was
Yeah.
the full context is not as you described it.
The full content? Are you kidding me, man? Come on. He was obviously trying to do a mob push on
The full context is we found double counted votes in, I think it was Fulton. Those were removed.
Oh,
right?
Tim.
Saying "oh Tim" isn't a response to the point I'm making.
I
Do you
just
have a
don't
response?
think
Or?
I don't think that's a credible argument.
So I'll do this. You are completely 100% correct, and I will see that argument to you.
Sure.
Now let's pause and we'll talk about Jenna Ellis and why I think saying I don't care about that is part of the problem.
Well, hold on. My statement is my focus is not Jenna Ellis.
Right.
It's Trump.
So when we talk about, say, like the corruption in our our justice system, I don't say, for the most part, look at this charge against Donald Trump for this specific thing he did. In fact, I say Jenna Ellis almost every single time. Don't get me wrong. I think the charges against Trump are laughable and they're egregious. But the real crux of the issue is they're going after his lawyers. Mm-hmm. And you can argue about Giuliani because Giuliani was deeply involved in a lot. And there's a question about what's the line. But Jenna Ellis didn't do anything.
Okay.
And you can also take a look at Mark Meadows. Going after former administration. Now, I'll tell you what's really shocking is Acting Assistant Attorney General Jeffrey Clark. He's quite literally appointed to a government position. Trump asks him a question about policy and he says, here's how it works. Here's what I think would happen. And they criminally charge him for it. The fact that Fani Willis is trying to indict former executive branch officials for giving their legal opinions as is their duty is insane.
Well, I think if it's as laughable a case as you're claiming, I guess it will be a very easy day in court. Also worth saying, Fani Willis
and hundreds of thousands of dollars out of their pocket.
Exact same grand jury that decided to push charges against Donald Trump also is going after a bunch of Antifa activists in Georgia.
It's the same grand.
For Stop Cop City.
It's not the same
bringing
people.
them up on. It was the same grand jury,
different
people,
same courtroom,
obviously.
different people.
But it's the same grand jury that decided to prosecute some people on racketeering charges.
And the Democrat recused herself from all the criminal proceedings.
My point here is this, to my estimation, seems to be the Justice Department functioning as it should be. Hold on.
This is Georgia. This is state level stuff.
So
not DOJ.
The Justice Department, meaning the justice system of the United States. Fine. What I think is happening here is, I think, frankly, you have a business relationship with the Trump campaign. You're doing events with Trump, and
Junior never met Trump.
I think that it would lead a reasonable person watching your show on the outside to go, what is going on here? Is Tim really being an impartial observer of this?
That's bad faith.
No, I mean, if I'm wrong, please tell me.
Well, it's completely factually incorrect.
So when have you criticized the Trump, just Trump in general?
This is what I said. We're running into the issue of people who often come from the other side don't watch the show. They'll see selective clips. How about we talk about when I called for Donald Trump to be criminally investigated for the death of an 8-year-old American girl in Yemen?
Okay.
I do that all the time.
Okay.
How about all of the issues we've brought up pertaining to he stopped disclosing the number of drone strikes happening in the Middle East and the argument around that?
Sure. But you're still going to vote for him.
Oh, yeah. My position is we are looking at a deeply broken and corrupt system that has been for quite some time. And don't get me wrong, the U.S. has a lot of really great things about it. In fact, it's probably the best country on the planet in a lot of different ways. But to sit back and take a look at like how the FDA revolving door politics work, how the Obama administration and the big
FDA revolving door politics?
Yes. Right. Like someone will work for a major pharmaceutical and then when they retire, they get appointed to the FDA.
Okay. Understood.
Right. This has been going on forever.
Right.
You take a look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership. You take a look at Monsanto. You take a look at how the United States gives favorable. Look at 2008. Let's talk about the housing crisis, which destroyed middle-class Americans.
Yeah.
The banks were offloading their screw up and none of them get arrested for the fraud they committed.
Matt Taibbi wrote a fantastic book about this. Everyone should read. It's just to come back to Eric Holder a minute in Gamergate. History has not been rough enough to Eric Holder in his failure to do anything.
Trump, I didn't vote for him in 2016, and I think, oh boy, he did a lot of what I expected it to be. I mean, come on, John Bolton, the people he brought in and brought around him. They say like, oh, did he drain the swamp? And I'm like, come on, man. There were some things he did that I liked. The economy was doing better. He brought back $3 billion worth of manufacturing into Michigan for the auto industry. I like the Abraham Accords. I like the work he did in crossing the DMZ, trying to bring peace to North Korea. And then he did a whole lot of, bad, stupid things that he justified. I respect that he was honest about a good amount of it, such as selling weapons to Saudi Arabia to profit for the U.S. economy or keeping troops in Syria to protect oil. That was hilarious. I'm glad that we had someone like that. But my view of Trump today is what we need is bureaucrats who have been in government for decades, career government employees, to be fired. And the closest we'll probably get to it is a Donald Trump presidency. The Biden administration will reinforce it. DeSantis will compromise with it. Trump, I don't know, if he goes in like a bull in a china shop, we'll get a bunch of broken glass, but we can then go in and clean that up and get rid of the problems.
So I think this is what we should be talking about today. Because I think you and I have very different theories of change for the United States. You know, I know this sounds idealistic, but you know, my father was a naval officer. I think every single day about duty to my country and what I owe my country. I genuinely do. And, you know, what I've seen throughout my lifetime is I think you have an era of leadership in the United States with the baby boomers that history is going to be brutal to. I think that this is an era of their leadership where they've done nothing about climate change, where income inequality has gone through the roof because of their lack of attention. Housing policy is broken, public transportation is broken, college is broken, loans are broken, our auto industry is broken, and they've just made bank the entire time. Not the people that vote, but the leaders themselves on both sides. I think history is going to be brutal. This is where I think we have a difference of perspective here. I see this and I think to myself, you know, Gen X, I'm the youngest Gen X can be. I'm the last year. Gen X, for whatever reason, did not take our place in government. We sat it out. We let our cynicism take over. And we really left the United States to the baby boomers to have an unusually long tenure of power.
Agreed.
And Alex, one of the lessons I've learned since Gamergate is there are productive things that I can do about that, and they're unproductive. Unproductive is having a very emotional response on Twitter when I'm getting a death or a rape threat and trying to, you know, basically shame men into acting better. That's not productive. A productive thing I can do is work through a PAC to elect candidates that I believe in, who will work on the policies that I believe in. And I think, generally speaking, Tim, what I've seen from your show is it seems to me you have this it's the same criticism I have of a lot of communist Twitter, where they want to break, they believe there's going to be this glorious revolution or just break everything apart. Then step two is question mark, and then it's utopia.
Well, I don't have any of that.
It seems like
Trump was president.
Like you want to wrecking ball everything.
No, I just want people who are unelected and have been in government for 2 decades to retire.
Okay.
It's actually not that dramatic of change for this country. We've had, I think it was in like the 50s, a major congressional shift where a bunch of incumbents get voted out. We definitely need something like that. We seem to be locked in. As Nancy Pelosi described it, you could take a glass of water with a D on it and her district is going to vote for it. And so that's an issue.
Well, it's San Francisco, yeah.
Right. And despite the problems that they're facing, they don't seek to do anything about it. They seek everything. They just keep doing the same things.
Can I just speak to that? Like in Massachusetts, we have a terrible housing crisis. And look, don't get me wrong, I'm Team Democrat all day, every day. But I've seen up close in my own efforts to get elected, the problem of institutionalized democratic power in a major city and how it is beholden to the money from big developers and the powerful business interests, right?
Exactly it.
But they're also very pro-union. Massachusetts has some of the strongest unions in the entire country. So I hear what you're saying. I've seen the downside to that. I don't think you can conclude that, you know, the entire system should be thrown away because of that.
But I'm not saying the entire system should be thrown away. In fact, I think it should be revitalized. I think the issue is that we've got people who are appointed positions in government, be it intelligence agencies or administrative positions, that are unelected, that are doing a bad job, that we need to fire.
Sure.
So towards the end of Trump's first term.
Can you give me an example of someone like that?
Let's just say, I don't think the FBI should be centralized, should be decentralized. We can talk about the likes of, you know, Clapper. Clapper's a really great example. He's not there now, but this is an example of the people who should be removed for instance, when he lied to Congress about NSA spying.
Right.
But more importantly, outside of trying to name any key individual, right?
Just a vague feeling that.
No, you've got mid-level managers.
Okay.
We don't know their names, but they're in these positions. There's too many of them. There's tens of thousands of bureaucrats. We want to whittle this down and kind of take an assessment as to why we're spending so much money on say like housing, but not actually solving the crisis. The simplified version is you've got bloated, inconsistent departments that don't seem to be solving their problems. So I'm referring to, say, like Department of Education employees. Would I go as far as to say abolish the DOE like Thomas Massey or many of the libertarians? Like, they go a little bit far from me, but I certainly think when you take a look at why we're struggling as a nation in education, but we have all of these employees in this department.
Yeah.
So Donald Trump comes in towards the end of his first term. He's got Schedule F, which would allow for the speedier termination of many of these government employees.
Right.
I'm in favor of that. I think centralization of power, be it corporate or government, leads to serious problems, oppression, and periodically we have to work to decentralize these systems, be it either through being able to assess and lay off people that have been here for too long and shouldn't be there, or, I think that's probably the best way to do it.
So if I can offer a counter perspective on that, a book that really changed my my understanding of how government operates at the highest levels. There's a guy out there, former editor of Time. His name is Richard Stengel. He wrote a fantastic book. It's called Information Warfare. It's all about the State Department's efforts to basically do counter-narrative to information warfare by ISIS under the Obama administration. So you have a guy that works in publishing his entire life, covering powerful government officials, and then boom, he's in the middle of the highest levels of the State Department and learning how the State Department functions. And you learn things like, the computers there are Windows 98, and you cannot receive email in a real way. And that the reason Colin Powell and Hillary Clinton had this email server issues because the computer system there is so broken and not maintained. It is because they needed to offload to Google so they could do their damn jobs, right? And you learn about like the way it's very decision hesitant because you have career professionals there that know they're going to be there for a Republican or a Democratic, presidency next, so they're very hesitant to do anything that will put their neck out on the chopping block, right? So I read Information Warfare, and the conclusion I come to with this isn't, the State Department is broken because we need to fire all the middle managers. It's actually the opposite. We need to invest in computer systems. We need to invest in like a way to open the front door. We need to like invest in the culture so people can speak their mind more freely. We need to professionalize it more. And I think that's a difference between us.
No, I agree. The issue is systems aren't comprised of machines. They're comprised of people.
And processes.
And if the people aren't willing to take the risks or do the job, for whatever reason, you need someone else.
But this is, I'm trying to be respectful to your Republican listeners, but it seems to me, generally speaking, if you're talking about the infrastructure of the United States, our airports are completely broken right now. And I think that is largely because we've been unwilling to invest in the kind of information technology overhaul that the FAA really needs. I think the same thing is true at the State Department. We need to be doubling down on the infrastructure, particularly technology infrastructure, that government has to do its jobs. And I do think disproportionately it has been Republican administrations that have been unwilling to fund.
Well, let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
The way I see it is the nation gets a wound. We get a cut on our arm.
Yeah.
And so to deal with that, we put a Band-Aid over it. We put a bandage on top.
Right.
First thing we got to do is we got to remove the bandage after a week, clean it, and then apply a new one.
Yeah.
That's the funding you're talking about.
Yeah.
However, right now, if we just simply say it's broken, put another Band-Aid on it, you get a festering wound.
Yeah.
So
the FAA right now.
So what we need is the failed leaders who are not doing what needs to be done, the people who are not doing their jobs effectively, the bloated systems and the wasted money need to be assessed and then realigned. So if this results in more funding or more efficient use of funding, the first thing you have to do is an audit, essentially.
Sure.
An audit of all of these systems.
Right.
But I'd be willing to be satisfied if that was the case. However, I do look at all of these systems and I see nobody's going to, like you mentioned, no one wants to put their neck out to lose their job.
Sure.
So everyone is going to fight as hard as possible to keep the position they have in the government. And we're probably at the point where I think after several decades of this, we have to say, tear off the bandage, clean it down.
Sure.
New program, or maintain same funding, but you've got to clean it up.
So, but wouldn't you agree with me? Like, if you look at government, and let's just be clear, the Obama administration had a wonderful program with a bunch of people from the tech industry that worked for his administration that started looking at the technology infrastructure challenges of the United States and wanted to bring their experience at Google, Apple, Microsoft, all these tech companies to come in and fix our broken processes. I believe that one of the reasons our technology infrastructure in the United States is so broken is because boomers don't consider these problems the way you and I understand that they're problems. This
Largely.
is Gen X's fault and the boomers' fault because we understand these problems. It's important to us. It's not important to them in the same way. So we need to be more invested.
I think it all comes down to everything is the boomers' fault. Just you name it. I
don't want to be mean, but
I'm being
I think
hyperbolic.
it's true to some extent. Yeah.
But and I must give credit to the boomers for things like Star Trek: The Next Generation, and Stargate, and the great things they did. But for whatever reason, it's not just the boomers. I'm being hyperbolic, but also I think Silent was before boomers.
Yeah.
Gen Xers were primarily raised by Silent because generations come in waves. But whatever it is between the Silent and the boomer generation, they did not instill civic duty in their children.
Yeah.
So now you have Gen Xers and millennials who are just like, I'm not going to be involved in this.
Yeah.
And you've got Mitch McConnell freezing in place, Dianne Feinstein in a wheelchair, hospitalized. These people are clearly too old for this job, and we need anyone. When Nancy Pelosi was running, I think this was it might have been 2018. I actually donated to the Progressive Challenger because I'm like, we desperately need the octogenarian to retire.
Yeah.
And if the younger woman who was running, I disagree with a lot of issues. However, she was anti-Middle Eastern intervention and she was for a lot of things I agree with in terms of ending war. And I said, that is infinitely better than what Nancy Pelosi has been doing.
Sure.
Instead,
I've critiqued Nancy Pelosi in the New York Times many times. There's just too many people who, for whatever reason, are grasping to power. Right.
Instead of sitting in a rocking chair in the sun, having some tea and enjoying the rest of their days.
So this is my challenge to you, Tim. And just give me a minute here to talk through this, because my perspective as a political professional might be slightly different than yours. But something you were talking about with Emma that I really found super striking is you were talking about the way your show was funded versus the way Majority Report is funded and the difference there. And am I correct to understand, like, a lot of your revenue doesn't come from Google AdSense, it comes from direct support from listeners? Is that correct?
We don't, it's split between direct sponsorships,
right,
memberships to the website. I think it's probably like 50-60% memberships.
Wow.
And then the rest is
that's huge, man.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Almost all memberships, but that's comparable to the Young Turks.
That's really impressive.
Yeah. I think they're bigger, but
one of the things at least Cenk has found frustrating, he's talked to me about, is because Google controls so much of who sees his content, it's very hard for him to mobilize the Young Turks audience, and every single show has this problem because Google is, from a data perspective, a black box. So it's difficult for Cenk to go to his audience and say, compare it against the voter file and figure out who is registered to vote, to send them a link to register to vote to make sure they can do that in this election. It seems to me, since so much of your show is membership supported, my challenge to you is you do have that information. And I would prefer your audience feel empowered to go participate in elections and make their voice heard, even if they aren't going to vote the same way I do.
That's the message of our show.
I would hope, I think you have a responsibility. I think all of us that are public figures have a responsibility to back away from this brink of civil war and to talk about healthy ways to engage and solve our differences in this country. And I just have to say, man, if you've studied civil wars around the world and how they work, and the bloodshed and warlords getting control of medicine and food and water supply and rape, and it is horrible. This is a fate we should all be deeply concerned with. I would rather talk about feminism a million times more than democracy, but most of my job is talking about democracy now because I do think we're on the brink. So I invite you, just last thing, I invite you, work within the political process.
That's
Get
what we
your
do.
audience engaged. I don't see that.
That's the literal message of the show. We've made every single day for the past. In fact, I went on like a 20-minute tirade on 2 nights ago on the Uncensored show about the need for people to go knock on doors and go vote. And that's what we've always said. So I suppose the issue we're dealing with is civil war isn't something that the average person ever wants.
Of course not.
Revolution, for the most part, isn't something the average person ever wants. Not even in the American Revolution. The issue, though, is what is happening in terms of the bifurcated view of people in this country and the absolute rejection. There is no argument to be made on some of these issues. And as this generation, I believe predominantly millennials, I'm not sure how it will affect with Gen Z. This could be averted if Gen Z is more unified in their worldview, but I'm not so sure that's the case considering the data we've seen.
From the polling I've seen, it's actually very consistent. That
But
we've done ourselves.
But I mean, if you look like Pew Research and just recently, Gen Z is skewing more conservative for the first time in 100 years.
Not from what we've done.
Pew
directly.
Research shows that Gen Z, while almost entirely comparable to millennials in terms of their political views, tick slightly right for the first time in 100 years. I can pull up for you.
I will show you our own data we've done after the show. It's not what we found at all.
So we also just had that story that came out showing that 12th grade males are overwhelmingly skewing.
I did see that.
So
well,
this
I
is
think that speaks to the failure of feminism. And I think that we need to be more engaged in having answers for men's lives as well.
Here's a overly simplified take. I'm not going to read through the entirety of the assessment, but it's from 2019. And you take a look at government should do more to solve problems. Gen Z, of course, more favorable to government. You take a look at increasing ethnic diversity is good. And it's fairly comparable. And then take a look at approval of Trump's job performance, and Gen Z ticks slightly more in favor. There are a bunch of other metrics in this that show Gen Z, like that's what I'm saying. Overwhelmingly, Gen Z is almost completely comparable to millennials, but it's the first time in 100 years we see in any way Gen Z is shifting. I mean, take a look at this. Gen Z is slightly less likely to believe in climate change, man-made climate change. So these are the issues that lead me to believe, or to say, when you're looking at the conflict we're experiencing, let's go back to Gamergate. Why was it that the first culture war battle was about video games? Well, that was the lives of 20-year-old individuals. People fresh out of college or in college who are working for a media publication aren't going to be writing about the politics of Liechtenstein. They're going to be writing about the new video game that came out. The people who are going to be upset about the political changes happening are going to be the people who are in that culture.
Right.
We're now 10 years on. These people are in their 30s and are dealing with taxes, home ownership. So now their disparate worldviews are pertaining more to the absolute political landscape.
So I just want to say, because I've literally paid for this poll myself, done it professionally through YouGov, professional data scientists, all of that. We didn't release it to the public, but I can show you after the show. What we have found is Gen Z are remarkably pragmatic voters. They don't particularly like Biden, but they really don't like the Republican Party. And they will vote for anyone who is not a Republican from the data that we've seen. Not all of them, but directionally the majority of them.
If you look at civics, you can see that there's almost 4. It used to be Democrat and Republican, but now you overwhelmingly have a third of, probably not more than a third of young people, but a third of voters being like, the Democrats suck, and then a third being like, Republicans suck. And it's created 4 positions where it's like conservative leaning person who hates both parties, Democrat leaning person who hates both parties, then Democrat voter and Republican voter. But just real quick, this is another data. This just came out at the end of July. High school boys are trending conservative.
Yeah.
So this led to a big internet trend. I mean, even it's dropped precipitously. But here's my point, to go back to the conversation about civil war. It's not an issue of people have been convinced to believe in something. It's an issue of people were raised in 2 different worlds, and now they're getting older and coming into power at odds with each other in extreme ways.
Right. So to come back to the graph you just put on screen, you could show an identical graph for young women who are being born in a world without access to abortion.
Right, you can see liberal spike.
So I think you can look at the result for women as practically a mirror of that. So I think that's worth noting.
Literal mirror. Yeah. So this is, males are becoming less liberal. It's very, very interesting. So that's why I say, for the most part, Gen Z looks, according to like Pew and a bunch of the other polls, fairly comparable. But I think what we're seeing here is I mean, this is interesting, gendered bifurcation.
Yeah.
But I bring that up.
If I could just say something about this, I think one of the lessons I've learned from Gamergate is I really remember thinking this, Alex, back in the day, that if we just shamed people enough and we pointed out the bad behavior enough and just retweeted enough of the death and rape threats that were going on, that there would be a moment where the shame would kick in and gamers would act better. And of course, that's a future that is never going to happen. When the actual Gamergate TV show that's in development, one of the things I pitched and kind of turned it into is talking more about what happened with the men, the young men during Gamergate. That's the more interesting story to me. What's going on in their lives to make them feel like they have no voice, to make them feel lonely? Why is Andrew Tate taking off so much? Like, why are young men so angry? And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I think, like, if we don't get really serious about solving this crisis of lonely young men in this country, don't get me wrong, you and I probably disagree on gun safety policy, but an equal part of that problem is the fact that we are creating so many phenomenally dangerous, young, lonely, desperate men. And there's a mental health crisis that we've got to pay very close attention to.
I agree with that. So to go back to what I was discussing, we're bringing up Civil War. I have these articles.
Go ahead.
My question to you first, as just like a opening preliminary, your stance on abortion, I assume, pro-choice.
I got the typical.
But is it 2000s Democrat or is it modern progressive? Right. So the question, a better question.
Sure.
Do you think there should be any restrictions at any point, or should there be some restrictions at some point?
So you're not going to like my answer, and feminists are not going to like my answer. That I've been in this game enough to recognize their political realities we need to think through. And, if we had to sacrifice, like, say, abortion a month out of actually, 8 months out to get a solid, like, non-interpretive, absolute right to abortion for the first 8 months, I would be fine with that. I'm generally speaking, if I'm looking at a policy, I'm asking myself what is going to do the most good in this particular moment. And I want to move the needle towards what gives women the most freedom over their own bodies.
So what we see, the two states that I use as an example, Colorado and Oklahoma. Oklahoma's banned it outright. Colorado has unrestricted it to the point of birth.
Okay.
These are worldviews that cannot coexist. You can't have a state. You can't have some states.
You can elect new people into power.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about the worldview of the citizenry who voted for certain things.
Sure.
The leader is not material to how these things come to conflict. So one of the challenges we had going back to the first Civil War, which existed since the dawn of this country, is who does the Constitution apply to? And this leads to the 14th Amendment to make it unambiguous that if you are born in this country, then you get human rights. But there is a question in the 14th Amendment about whether you have to be born or not. Being born grants you citizenship, but human rights apply to humans. So the question that's being brought up now is, like back then, who is human?
Right.
Oklahoma says an unborn human has human rights. Colorado says they do not.
According to the jurisprudence right now, but yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a question of the federal government, not state governments, to determine who is to be granted constitutional rights. This has to be clear and unambiguous by the Supreme Court, which is probably why at first I thought Roe v. Wade being overturned was probably good, in that states would determine what was best for their states. And then shortly after realized you can't have a question of human rights be determined individually at a state level when the Constitution applies federally.
Yeah.
So if the Constitution guarantees you certain things, we have to determine at what point we recognize. My concern is if we're coming to a point where that's actually eroding, it doesn't matter if the states determine it one way or the other, or the federal government does. What matters is that the country is split completely in half on the issue of who gets human rights, and has been for a while.
See, this is where I think you and I have disagreement, because I look at the loss of Roe, and the way I think of this is, I've seen enough of your show to understand you have a certain stereotype of what leftists are. This is my experience of who the Democratic Party is. It's a bunch of women my age that are moms, that go phone bank and knock on doors and,
No, I agree with that.
and do all this unglamorous, unsexy work behind the scenes. It's people that live in their town and go to DTCs that stand up. It's people that go to every single town meeting.
But that is our position.
Well, hold on.
Well, you mischaracterize our view of what liberals are.
Okay.
I'll make sure that's clear. But
Okay,
continue.
well, if you agree with that,
Right.
it's not what I've gotten from your show, but thank you for clearing that up.
Leftists are not Democrats.
Okay, fair enough. So these are the people that, in my view, have power here. I think that we as a party have sat and taken abortion rights for granted for far too long. The Obama administration had a moment where they could codify this into law and chose not to. And I think this is a real wake-up call for women and Democrats in general, that we need to organize, we need to show up, we need to donate to our own lobbying groups that will make this a priority, and we need to work through the legislative process to secure this again. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a 20-year project, but we need to work through the system.
I don't think it's an issue that can be codified or solved. The question is very simply,
Yeah,
if
there's
a baby-
always going to be a difference between our positions.
but it's an extreme one. It's who is human and who is granted constitutional rights.
I think that this issue is ginned up by the media in a way that's disproportionate to its impact on people. And I think if the media were concentrated, this is a larger critique of the media. The media were more if we talked more about the issues that actually affect people's lives, housing policy, inflation, real wages, income inequality. I think if we solved those issues, I think that this kind of culture war stuff would be less divisive. And I think it's a choice we make every single day. Are we working productively, or are we at each other's throats?
Yeah, I completely disagree. I think the fundamental worldviews and moral structures of the left and the right today are unbridgeable.
Oh, I completely disagree. I could not disagree with you more.
Let's take a look at a couple books that we got on the table here.
I
that
can't
come up.
defend that book. I looked at it before the show.
But why?
So-
Why does the corporate press? Why does the Democratic Party? Why does the Department of Education? Why are these school boards? And to be specific, two books: Genderqueer and This Book Is Gay, completely inappropriate for kids. Why? When a teacher, a middle school teacher, provided this book to her 10-year-old, 12-year-old students, which includes instructions on using Grindr, they called the police on her. Why did Emma defend it?
I love Emma. I'm not going to say a bad word about her. I have a different position there. I think it is utterly routine for libraries across this country to look at what is in the books for their students and to make judgment calls. I have no objection to that whatsoever. I do think that access to LGBT material, which is age appropriate, is just a free speech, free information, libraries, open society kind of issue, and I support that. But if an individual book is like someone's looking at it and is determining it's too graphic for an age audience, I have zero issue with that.
So we can agree,
Sure.
right? Genderqueer is completely inappropriate, as is This Book Is Gay.
Sure.
Yet it is popping up in schools. And when parents say, like Loudoun County, which is literally 30 seconds away, when the parents there said, why is this book being taught? The FBI labels them terrorists.
Do you know what I hear about, Tim, from people that I talk to? They're actually parents, and what they're thinking about in school. They're thinking about their child that has depression after being at home for a year for COVID, and they're under socialized and they're on Adderall.
But that's
They're
not
talking
that's
on
not
Instagram doing damage to their teenage girls. I hear
Agreed.
you, and I agree with you. This should not be in schools. I just don't think real people care as much as you do.
Why are we seeing parents all across the country at these board meetings and these videos keep popping up? Who are these people that keep showing up to these meetings and filming and having these videos filmed of them saying, why is this in my school? We have hundreds of instances in the past year alone or so. You just recently had a viral video of a man trying to read from one of these books, and he was removed. They turned his mic off and they removed it. Not the first time we've seen it. We had Asra Nomani come on the show, I think almost 2 years ago, with a stack of books. And it's not just about these inappropriate, it's about ideological bents that are causing issues with parents.
I'm agreeing with you. I think
know.
there's
I'm not
a
saying you're
role
disagreeing.
for-
I'm saying-
there's a role for them to play. And I think if a parent wants to go to their PTA and talk about this, I think that's utterly routine. This is free society stuff.
So when you have, at the highest level of politics, a bifurcation between worldviews, whether you agree with me or not, that's granular. The issue being when Florida, for instance, passed the Parental Rights and Education Bill, which was fairly broad, the response from the Democratic Party and the media was "Don't say gay," which was a complete misinterpretation of what the bill actually was for political reasons.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing that is leading people to say, like, we are on the verge, among many other things. There's grains of sand that ultimately make a heap. But these are things that are leading to the bifurcation of this country.
So I know this sounds idealistic, Tim, but this is something Cenk and I talk about a lot. That I think that this is something that's meant to divide us. And I want to be really clear. I have a different assessment of LGBT rights than I think you do. But at the same time, in my experience, like when I ran for office, I counted it one time. It was tens, 20, 30,000 conversations I had when I ran for office, getting off effing Twitter, out there in the real world, shaking their hands, talking to people, meeting them at the door, asking questions. What's important to you? What's important in your kid's life? What's the biggest policy issue that you care about? And overwhelmingly, Republican or Democrat, it is housing. It is real wages. And something Cenk and I feel very, very, very strongly about is, yes, this stuff is important to me, but if we're looking at getting America back on the right track, we've got to focus more broadly on what impacts your audience's lives. And just one more thing. I think if your audience was being real and they were in the room today, I think they would tell me they care a lot more about how they're going to pay their rent than that damn book.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Most people.
So why do we not talk about that as much?
But but I think that is the issue. I think the issue is people looked at 2019 and the strong economic numbers, and then the Democratic Party's underhanded manipulations to try and stop Trump, and that is ripping this country to
I don't
shreds.
agree it was underhanded.
Well, so like the first impeachment we now know was a hoax, right? Ukraine-gate.
Okay, I don't share that assessment.
But it's only because you don't know. Right, you didn't read the
I
sworn.
followed that pretty closely.
Have you read the sworn affidavits out of Ukraine? Have you read the New York Times report on what Ukraine was engaged in during the 2016 election? Do you know who Viktor Shokin is?
I think
do you know about?
I listened to the hearings, and I cannot give you direct quotes of everything that happened back
My point.
then. Hold on. But I remember hearing the phone call. Who was the NSA guy that came in? Alexander Vindman. Hearing his testimony, I think that what Trump did was very clearly a shakedown.
What did Trump do?
He tried to influence the foreign policy of the United States to dig up dirt on his political opponent.
What's wrong with that?
It is obviously wrong because
Okay,
you
so
cannot
should Joe Biden
you
be impeached for telling AG Merrick Garland to go after Trump?
I don't.
New York Times reported Joe Biden went to Merrick Garland and instructed him to go after Trump.
I think that there is a very big difference in someone giving the Justice Department a free hand to pursue illegalities where they may exist and someone doing a shakedown,
Does Donald Trump?
threatening things that affect our geostability
Okay,
in the entire world and the national security policy of the United States.
Do you think Donald Trump had the authority to withhold congressionally approved loan guarantees to Ukraine unless they took the political action he wanted?
I think at the core, Donald Trump is a crook.
Okay, can you
Sure.
answer? Do you think Donald Trump had the authority to do
I would need to
that?
sit down and look at that particular instance. But
So
my
you don't know?
recollection of the first impeachment was it was very well founded.
Okay, so the issue at question is,
And
well, I mean, if you
most
don't know
people-
about it,
most people looked at this when it happened and reached the same assessment that I did.
I think saying most people is probably an appeal to authority, but doesn't apply when the country's split in half, right? With 75 million people voted for Donald Trump, clearly they didn't agree with what you're saying.
I think something you're really skilled at doing is you find these edge cases that prove a point you want to have. I think directionally, most reasonable people would look at the phone call that he had, that Alexander Vindman came forward and talked about, and understand that's an underhanded thing to do.
Right, so it's really easy to use. This is a beautiful trick of the corporate press, and I'll criticize a right-wing publication for using this technique. The CDC recently came out, said with the B2, I think it was the B286 variant, those who have immunity, either because of previous COVID infection or the COVID vaccine, are more susceptible to this virus. Leading report, I think it's called, tweeted, the CDC says if you've been vaccinated, you're more likely to catch the new variant, which is cutting out a large portion of the context. So it's masterfully done. I think it was masterfully done how the Democrats took a legitimate national security issue for which Trump did what he was supposed to do and turned it into Trump did something wrong But of course, you'd hold that position if you don't actually know the circumstances around it.
Tim,
if the only thing
I would
you know,
ask you to talk to me with respect. I did follow this.
But no. It's not a question of respect that you don't know this. It's not a question of being disrespectful or respectful.
I don't focus on the same edge cases.
It's not an edge case. It's the impeachment of the president. This is the first impeachment of Donald Trump and why it was done and who did it. So there's a whole lot to this. For instance, Joe Biden, we now know, was involved with Hunter Biden's business dealings. Of course, at the time they said it wasn't true. We now know that he used an alias, was it Robert L. Peters or Robert Ware, to provide government information to Hunter Biden and to Devin Archer as they were engaged in foreign business dealings. By all means, you can think that's fine. That's not the issue at question.
No, it's not that I think it's fine. It's that the assessment I reach is, look, if the Justice Department wants to investigate Hunter Biden and look at this stuff with Joe Biden, I have zero issue with that.
Donald Trump was the Justice Department.
The difference in our assessment here is I have no objection to the rule of law in the Justice Department looking into politicians that do things that are wrong. I think we need a million times more of it. I think you and I would probably agree. Like there was a bill before the House when Nancy Pelosi was in charge looking at insider trading by Congress.
Agreed.
Of course that should be passed.
So let me ask you.
Of course, and they don't do that. I want to see much more aggressive.
Right. We agree. But
Sure.
let's get to the
Just
core of the
one more
impeachment.
thing about this,
well, so
because I think that when you're a public figure, you're held to higher standards of ethics and behavior. And I think we're far too willing to let our own side off the hook. And respectfully, I think you're doing that with Donald
Should
Trump.
Joe Biden be impeached for threatening the president of Ukraine with withholding congressionally approved loan guarantees unless they fired the prosecutor who was investigating Burisma?
I've never read anything that's true.
Okay, yes, Joe Biden is on camera sitting with the Council on Foreign Relations, and he said, I went to Ukraine and I spoke with the president, and he said, unless you fire the prosecutor, you're not getting the $1 billion. Are you familiar with this?
I'm not.
Okay, we'll have to pull that video up. You see, this is the challenge. Right now, not only have we had a sworn affidavit, we have a sworn affidavit from Victor Shokin. We have additional statements from him. Oh man, pulling up this stuff on the fly. Let's see. It is rather remarkable that you're unfamiliar with this. Probably better off pulling it up on Twitter, to be completely honest. Oh yeah.
I'd prefer to see a reputable news source.
I'll get you the CFR's actual video of it. Oh, you just jump in here in old Twitter, and then it's so here's the latest from Victor Shokin, but here's just the video of the CFR.
Hold on, what is this Twitter account? Can we go back?
I meme, therefore I am.
Okay.
Is a CFR video of Joe Biden not good enough for you though?
Convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees, and I went over. I guess.
Can you start it over,
12,
Tim, so I can really pay
13
attention?
I remember going over convincing our team, or others, to convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, I'm not going to, or we're not going to give you the $1 billion.
Isn't this
They
about
said,
the corruption?
You have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I looked, I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time. Well, I
So
remember going
the
over
assumption
convincing
I'm going to make here, and this is in good faith, the assumption I'm going to make here is there were issues with corrupt prosecutors in Ukraine.
False.
Right? As I understand it, that is what was going on there, and I would strongly suspect that's what Biden is talking about, because there were issues getting people the money.
I mean, sure, when someone mugged someone, they said I didn't mug them. I was just asking for the money. The evidence that we have currently is that Joe Biden was involved with Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma. Hunter Biden was receiving $83,000 per month with his partnership with Devin Archer. They were involved in a slew of business dealings for which Joe Biden claimed he wasn't involved, but we now know was using an alias to provide government information. The prosecutor, Viktor Shokin, in Ukraine had about a dozen plus, according to Matt Taibbi, open investigations into the corruption of Mykola Zlochevsky. It is now known that Hunter Biden was asked to make a call to D.C. to help solve this problem, for which a few days later, Joe Biden flew to Ukraine, and without the authority to do so, because the vice president does not have authority to withhold congressionally approved loan guarantees, threatened the president that he would withhold it unless they fired the prosecutor, because after the fact they say this, we put in someone good. Now, the problem with this story is...
How do you know intention?
Let's get there. Mykola Zlochevsky, the founder of Burisma, had fled the country during these investigations. We know that Hunter Biden was asked specifically to call D.C. to deal with the prosecutor investigating Burisma. After Joe Biden went and got the prosecutor fired, they put in someone who he said was solid. And then the corrupt Zlochevsky returns to Ukraine. When Donald Trump began looking back into what this was about, Zlochevsky flees the country again. So here we have evidence for which you've never heard. But the fact remains. Joe Biden was engaging in private business dealings. If you want to argue it's fine he does because they all influence peddle, make arguments about Ivanka Trump
not my argument.
But I'm not saying you, I'm the rhetorical you.
Sure.
That Ivanka was doing trade deals or copyright stuff with China, fine. But for the vice president to fly out a few days after Hunter Biden contacts DC with a problem of a quote unquote prosecutor investigating or a prosecutor quote unquote investigating Burisma, and he then threatens a quid pro quo against the country, which he has no authority to do. And then when Donald Trump says, what's this all about? They say Trump's the one who did something wrong.
Okay. So 2 things here. I hear what you're saying. I think you're making a conclusion where there's not evidence you can tell what's in Joe Biden's mind there. But if you're talking about throwing Hunter Biden to the wolves of the Justice Department, I have no issue with that. My problem here, Tim, is I think it's about proportionality, right? It's like, I think directionally, if you look at the integrity of the State Department and the processes under Joe Biden, I think directionally, of course, you can find things that you can criticize, but I think it has shown infinitely more integrity than you can find under the Trump administration.
I mean, an argument, if we're talking about specifically about the impeachment, then feel free to say everything you want to say. You want to turn the monitor over? Look, you can deny.
I just want to say this is a very slope side because you can put up any clip and demand to it, and there's not.
Hunter Biden called D.C. to get Ukraine prosecutor fired for Burisma, his ex-business partner.
According to the Free Beacon.
And the Free Beacon is NewsGuard certified 80%.
Okay.
Is NewsGuard not good enough for you?
I don't know what NewsGuard is. I typically get my news from New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times.
So, right. And if Devin Archer has testified that this is the case, you can say they're lying, the media's fake news. I'll take that, fine, sure, whatever. But at a certain point...
How many times do I have to say if Hunter Biden effed up?
No, it's Joe Biden. Yeah. It's Joe Biden. And when Donald Trump actually
Hunter Biden
called D.C. to Ukraine, and then 4 days later, Joe Biden flew to Ukraine to get the prosecutor fired. If you're going to be that obtuse, you're not here in good faith.
No, I just...
4 days after Hunter calls and says the prosecutor's shaking us down, Joe Biden goes and threatens to withhold, illegally I might add, congressionally approved loan guarantees. And when we have a president, you can call Donald Trump all the names in the book. You can call him disgusting, lewd, lascivious, and corrupt. But if he calls and says, what's going on with this Joe Biden thing? And they say, quick, impeach Donald Trump. I'm sorry. I don't think Trump is the corrupt one in that story.
I think it's just conspiracy thinking, man.
It's a conspiracy that Hunter Biden called D.C. to get the prosecutor fired, and then Joe Biden flew to Ukraine to get the prosecutor fired. Those are facts.
Those are facts. The temperature. We've had a great conversation.
Those are facts.
Almost 2 hours. Let's turn down the temperature here. I hear what you're saying. I will look into this, and I will happily call into your show or do whatever you want to do. If you want to have another conversation about this when I've looked into what you're alleging more, I promise I will look into this.
I'm not alleging anything. I'm citing news for you, and I showed you a video.
I'm going to finish what I'm saying. What I think a problem with your show is, and I think this is, yeah, Tim, what I was hoping we could talk about today is how you moved from Occupy Wall Street, which one of my critiques of Occupy Wall Street is there was a lot of I think, I don't want to say conspiratorial thinking, but it was not a productive paradigm of why wealth inequality is where it is in the United States. And I think there is a part of your thinking that falls into false equivalence and to believe there's some huge conspiracy when I don't
What
think
conspiracy?
that's always here. I think in this particular case, I think you are magnifying a single event, and you're coming to the conclusion that because this phone call was made, this is evidence that the Democrats were impeaching Trump in bad faith, and that the Democrats are just as corrupt as the Republicans, and we had no good reasons for doing this, and everything Trump did in Ukraine is justified. And I don't think that's a credible
those are a bunch
argument.
of big leaps. I mean, it's not a conspiracy to say, fact, Hunter Biden called D.C. to get Ukraine prosecutor fired for Burisma. Fact. Joe Biden then, shortly after, flew to Ukraine to get the prosecutor fired. Those are facts.
Sure.
Those are absolute, solidified, knowable facts, not a conspiracy.
I
He did it.
think that one of the issues I have with your show is about proportionality and impact. And I think that generally speaking, you amplify smaller things to fit a narrative that you want to talk about to your audience.
Sure, but the
and I
president
think
was
this is a
impeached.
good example.
A presidential impeachment is a historical event.
That's right. And
Yeah.
I think most Democrats felt like Nancy Pelosi didn't even want to do this, right?
So, do you think that it matters that the American people understand the underlying context of what this impeachment was about?
I think if the Republicans want to make a case against Joe Biden for this, you've got control of the House. Have your day. I think it's going to be, hold on. I think it's going to be very difficult to talk about this in a way that's going to make most people think Biden is a fundamentally dishonest person. That is my belief.
So, I talk about the news and news things that happen. I talk about things that I think are important. I don't make a show with the intent of lowering rent prices or anything like that.
Right.
So when a historical event happens in the news, such as evidence emerges that Hunter Biden was engaged in business dealings and solicited his father for assistance in removing a prosecutor investigating a company for which he was the board of, those are exactly the kind of things that I cover.
Okay.
And that's probably why my audience is a lot smaller than, say, the likes of Steven Crowder or I'm assuming to the Young Turks as well. I mean, they're massive.
Yeah.
Right. They got way more subscribers. Yeah, sure. If I came out and just did surface level shot content with a political angle, I'd probably get way more views. But if we come out and we break down the inner workings of like Matt Taibbi's reports on the investigations into Burisma, we talk about the Qatar-Turkey pipeline, the former CIA director who was also on the board of Burisma and the U.S. intelligence operations that were playing a role in gas and energy in Europe and stuff like that. Probably a bit esoteric for the average person.
Sure, but you also allow Jackson Hinkle onto your show, who, by
And
the way,
Vosh.
is not.
And you.
Hold on, I'm talking about this individual segment with him. You let Jackson Hinkle onto your show, who I looked. He is not registered as a foreign lobbyist in this country, despite the fact that he's out there doing a lot of esoteric talking points that I think a lot of reasonable people would look at his content and have some questions, right? And he is here, is putting a bunch of stuff out there, the most pro-Russian argument you could possibly have in a million years, talking about Russia as if they are strong and powerful and smart, and the United States is weak and dumb and fragile. And I watched the whole segment. No other voice, no contesting any of it. And I just think if you're talking about like proportionality, I think that looking at what's going on with hostile nation states, I think that like you're so quick to believe this stuff about America, it doesn't seem credible to me.
I don't understand why you're pulling up a single guest that we just had on the show and not any of the other guests who have
Because
been in
I
favor of
think it
conflict
is
in Ukraine.
indicative of the argument I have against your show, which
That
is
we've
proportionality.
hosted one person who is in favor of Russia's conflict?
I think that it is indicative of how quickly you are to believe things about this country that I don't think are true.
So you're referencing one guest we had one time.
Sure.
What about the other guests we've had who have been in favor of intervention in Ukraine and support the American perspective and narrative?
So, Tim, in preparing for this show, I looked at most of your shows for the last week. I looked at most of your tweets over the last month. And I think directionally, they were very pro-Trump. They're very anti-Justice Department, very pro ending support for Ukraine. And I think this is a common line in your thinking. to break up the national security apparatus and to, to the United States is the bad guy, basically.
Yeah, the United States is not the bad guy. The bureaucratic state and the intelligence agencies are evil.
Sure.
Unquestionably.
Wow.
Unquestionably.
Really?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Abject. And I certainly have
You
spoken.
think officers for the CIA that put their lives on the line, you think they're evil?
I think
To go find terrorists?
is that the oversimplification you're going to say?
Well, you say it's evil, like
I
directionally.
mean, do we want to talk about, the senator's name? I'm forgetting. The commission with like the heart attack gun. We want to talk about MK Ultra. Do we want to talk about the operations against Martin Luther King and
Sure.
Malcolm X? I mean, come on. I don't
But
see it.
directionally.
Directionally, we have a constitution and we have a government of, for, and by the people. What do we have today? I don't know. NSA spying? You think the NSA is not abject evil?
No, look, I remember getting pissed off about Leviathan during the Bush administration.
Clapper lying to Congress about NSA
Where
spying?
they had a main line into Apple technology and email all across the United States. Edward Snowden brought this out. I fully agree with that. I also think, look, Tim, humans have been slaughtering each other for resources since we were with
I agree.
spears across the Serengeti. America's a powerful nation. We have enemies. And of course, we need an intelligence service the way every large nation needs an intelligence service.
So why
if
does
you
the
want to
FBI
talk about reform? I'm on board with you. If you're saying they're categorically evil, that's where we part ways.
Right. Yeah. So you have the banality of evil. You have the abject. You have in the FBI, of course, I've met many people who are not evil. They're really good people.
Yeah.
And what they explain to me is the problems we see in modern politics exists within their ranks, the same as any other
Of course.
industry. The problem is then you end up with corrupt leadership and a fear to confront them because you will be put on the chopping block. You'll be targeted. Much like many people are scared to speak up of like Weinstein. How long did it take for people to finally come after decades of this guy raping women?
Sure.
Nobody would speak up about it. And you have these things everywhere. So what ends up happening is, I don't know how many, anecdotally, you're let down by the DOJ under Eric Holder.
Sure.
We are let down currently under Merrick Garland when we've had the bomb squad sent here multiple times.
Ooh.
We've had, we were evacuated for 3 hours once as they did a bomb sweep in the building. We've been swatted 13 times plus the two bomb swatting incidents. We believe we have strong evidence as to who did it, and they will not pursue it. But hey,
Exactly what happened to
Bubba
me.
Wallace has
Exactly.
got a pull rope in his garage, and they'll send 12 agents down.
Exactly
Come
what
on.
happened to me.
You had
I
a
think
lady
that's
in
fair.
Alaska who was in D.C. on January 6th, but not in the building, and they raided her home. You have Enrique Tarrio, who wasn't even in D.C., and they gave him 22 years.
Right.
You have a guy who burns down a police station. He gets 4 years. There is a clear failing going on in terms of equality under the law across the board. I met a woman
Yeah.
who was in D.C. on January 6th, was not at the Capitol when any violence happened. Several hours after the violence had halted, she and her husband had walked on the opposite side of the building where the riot was, and they walked up the stairs with no police around, with no barricades. She didn't know what was going on, and she apologized to the federal police, to the Capitol Police, and to the court, saying it was a misunderstanding. She didn't know, and they said, "We don't care. You were part of a mob," and they sentenced her. Their sentencing guidelines were 16 months.
I have to say, I saw your tweet the other day with the Proud Boys leader that was very correctly sentenced to a very lengthy sentence.
For what did he do?
You were going after
did he do?
some. Hold on, Tim.
Well, no. You
were
said
going-
correctly. Now answer that.
You were going after. He helped organize this from behind
Organize
the
what?
scenes. The insurrection against.
Did you follow the
Capitol.
case? That's not what they've alleged.
I can't.
They did not
answer
allege
your
that.
Question if
Don't
you
say
let
something.
Me talk, Tim.
They did not allege he organized it behind the scenes.
There were messages that were out there of him helping organize this,
Incorrect.
hyping it up. He was one of the masterminds behind it.
Incorrect.
According to my understanding of
Read the
this.
story.
And then he was thrown in, he was very correctly sentenced because of this. So the part of the story that you hang on to was somebody's tweet where they were
Reiner.
admittedly incorrectly saying he was actually at the Capitol that day. He was not at the Capitol that day, but he did play a huge organizing role.
That's not what
and
they've accused him
that
of.
was the reason the case was brought to fruition.
You need to
And
reread the story.
I think this was the sleight of hand that you consistently do with your audience.
You clearly didn't read this. You're incorrect.
I think people out there can watch this and make their own assessment.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
The argument was not that he organized it. The argument is substantially broader, and it was actually admitted in court. There was no plan. There was no evidence of a plan. You really, if you didn't read it, why are you giving me that face?
You've got to stop saying I haven't read this stuff.
But you didn't.
I just read it, come to a different conclusion.
No. It's not a different conclusion. Your facts of the case are incorrect.
You think everyone that has a different worldview than you hasn't read everything you've read and come to the same conclusion? I followed this.
I asked you specifically, and you said no.
I followed this case very carefully. I read the judge's remarks on it.
Okay.
And I came, by the way, it was a Trump appointee judge, if I'm not
Kelly,
correct.
right?
Yeah. Came to the conclusion that, look, this looks like a serious court case with very serious problems, and this seems like a just sentence. It was even adjusted down as per the sentencing guidelines.
Do you know why Owen Schroyer, what his sentencing, his charging documents, his sentencing documents?
Do you believe that the people that planned the insurrection,
who planned it?
They don't need to be put in jail?
No, hold on. Who planned it?
Do you believe that the people that the justice system has found
you see, you changed your question.
I'm trying to ask you a question, man.
The people who plan.
Do you believe that directionally, the people that have been charged for malfeasance on January 6th, do you think in the totality that these are cases that should be brought to the justice system?
The people who planned and carried out January 6th should go to prison.
Okay.
Now, to say that the government is correct in who they charge is a question of innocent until proven guilty,
right,
and who you're speaking about specifically.
Right.
So, for one, I'm not referring to anybody who engaged in active violence. There are, for instance, one guy was acquitted of all charges because there's a video of the police fanning them into the building.
Okay.
There's a video of the police opening the doors and allowing people into the building, which is why some people got misdemeanor trespass and some people got seditious conspiracy, right? So, first, I don't trust the government, right? That's the basis of our Constitution and how the justice system is supposed to operate. But when it comes to the Proud Boys, it is definitive they had no plan. And I'm telling you about the court case, not my opinion. They said no evidence was presented of a plan in advance. They knew that there was going to be a protest, and they went. According to court documents, Enrique Tarrio was not in communication with the Proud Boys during the riot, the breaking into of the Capitol. At some point, he said either before anything happened, don't leave. And at some point afterwards, he referred to someone as George Washington.
You really sound like you have a soft spot for the people that committed an insurrection against our country.
We'll define insurrection.
What happened on January 6th, man?
But a lot happened on January 6th, right? Like, for one, at the Ellipse, there's a speech, right?
So
Donald Trump is still speaking when the barricades are torn down.
Sure.
Was Donald Trump involved in insurrection?
I think this is how I feel about this. So, do you think Casey Anthony killed her child?
I don't know enough about that case.
I do. I think you can look at that situation and come to the conclusion, like I looked at this and I've come to the conclusion that she probably murdered her baby.
As someone who's not followed it and hasn't read it, I defer to you.
Sure. She was found innocent in a court of law. And as far as I'm concerned, the justice system played out. I personally think she did it. Justice was done. The appeals process went through. This was a fine verdict. And in a democracy, sometimes the Justice Department comes to conclusions I don't agree with. So sometimes in a democracy, the Justice Department, in my estimation, looked at these cases and came to conclusions. In my reading of the facts, they seem utterly fair and even a little conservative in many cases. You've reached a different conclusion, and the way you feel about it is your judgment and your appraisal of the situation supersedes what the judge and jury in our justice system came up with. And
That's correct.
Right. That's crazy.
That's called a political opinion. It happens all the time in this country.
You can have the opinion, just like I do with Casey Anthony, that this was not a great verdict.
Right.
But I think the difference is you're coming to this wild conclusion that the entire cake is not baked correctly.
What do you mean? When did I say the entire bag is not cooked?
You seem like you're saying that January 6th, that this should not be prosecuted, and the conclusion I'm getting. So
when I said
maybe I'm misunderstanding
the first thing we started
here.
with was the people who planned and orchestrated January 6th should be in prison.
Sure.
Okay, so when did I
But
say
now
otherwise?
you're going and like defending all these individual cases.
Let's talk about Joe Biggs. Why did he get 19 and a half
I
years?
did not. I don't know.
But you said it was just.
I think
That-
directionally, every story I have read about January 6th, to repeat myself, seems like it is a very conservative sentence for what happened.
Do you know what the banality of evil is?
I know it's a book.
It's a reference to the commonplace of evil that happens without thought, typically because people aren't paying attention, don't know what happened, and they
Sure.
just carry on with it. It's typically a reference to how did Germany get so bad, right?
You're comparing that to the January 6th insurrectionists? Do you not see
I'm not.
how extreme that is?
I'm not doing that at all. That
Okay.
was bad faith.
No, I'm saying...
I'm asking if
yeah,
you're familiar with the concept of the banality of evil.
I understand that. Are you saying that it is evil for me to believe in the Justice Department prosecuting?
No, I'm
You're
saying
equating
that you saying that Joe Biggs, without knowing what he did, deserves 2 decades in prison.
I can't follow every single court case. I have a
Then
job,
when you ask me about Casey Anthony, my response is I don't know.
and I accept that.
Then you say I didn't read anything about Joe Biggs, but he deserves 2 decades. You
Saying
see the difference?
directionally. My statement to you, which I will repeat, is every single court case I've followed from this makes it seem like the Justice Department has followed an excruciating process and has given people their fair day in court and has arrived at a situation that seems reasonable to me.
So let's talk about civil liberties and human rights.
Okay?
Do humans in court cases deserve to be treated as individuals and presumed innocent until proven guilty?
Of course.
So
Which,
let's-
by the way,
let's-
you're not doing with Hunter Biden.
how
Well,
am I
Joe
not?
Biden at least.
How am I not doing with Joe Biden?
You're reaching conclusions when this has not been adjudicated about
Oh,
what his
I
intention
didn't
is.
actually reach a conclusion.
Yeah, I think your audience would probably disagree.
So if Hunter Biden is asked to call DC, Joe Biden flies out and engages in a quid pro quo, which are facts, what's my conclusion?
I think you're trying to suggest to your audience that Joe Biden is corrupt, and the reason for that, that gives Trump a excuse to do what he did in Ukraine. I think that is the
So let's-
plain
let's-
message that you're giving there.
Let's go, and
So-
I'll respect that opinion.
Sure.
Let's talk about Joe Biggs. You don't know what he did.
I didn't follow that particular case. No.
So I am telling you, in my opinion,
Sure.
supporting an individual going to prison for 2 decades without knowing what they did is called the banality of evil. It is not that you're an evil person, but that you don't educate yourself on the issue and you carry on with your life and say it's probably okay. My concern is when any person is taken by force and locked in a cage, the government, I'm opposed to the death penalty,
Sure.
abjectly. And the reason for it is there is no circumstance in which the government can convince me beyond a reasonable doubt that a person should die. And then people say to me, oh, but what about child abusers and molesters and all these awful things and murderers and rapists? And I'm like, listen, a government agent comes to me and says, I can prove to you that guy killed this person. And they show me this evidence. And then I have to say to myself, what's the percentage chance this is not correct? There is no circumstance in which I know definitively that this person did these things. However, locking them in a box for the rest of their lives for egregious crimes, at least I'm not signing a death warrant. Now, when it comes to someone, Joe Biggs is a specific example. He was given a terrorism exception, or whatever it's called, add-on, because he's seen on camera shaking a metal barricade. And they said this precipitated the tearing down of the barricades, which warrants an extension into terror.
Yeah.
That's the extent of what he did, and he's getting 2 decades in prison.
Trying to force him his way over a barricade
now you're
so
drawing
people
conclusions.
could come in. No, I'm trying to repeat back to you. what
Shaking
you're
a
saying
barricade on camera.
to break it.
Did he? I mean,
Was that the
what's in it-
intention? You saw the video. and
What's
I
in his
did not.
mind?
I don't know.
neither.
You saw the video. I'm asking you a question, man.
I'm saying I don't know. What I can tell you is
Yeah.
he should go to prison. He should not go to prison for 20 years.
So
And he's been in for 2.5 years already. I kind of think, when I was at Occupy Wall Street and I watched occupiers rip down barricades and punch cops in the face, 20 years would be a bit too much for that.
Yeah.
I do think that there is extenuating circumstances pertaining to the electoral vote count, and that is going to exacerbate the charges, but come on. 20 years?
the way I feel,
We can't allow that.
I think that when January 6th happened, this was, it was a real event in American history where the peaceful transfer of power was being threatened. And I think if there's any situation for the justice system to take their role extremely seriously and to dole out very harsh punishments. I think it's imperative, because if you don't crack down on that very aggressively, it makes it far more likely that future elections are not going to result in the peaceful transfer of power. So while not knowing this case specifically, I think directionally it is incredibly important that we prosecute the people involved in January 6th, because without peaceful transfer of power, we do not have a country.
What about May 29th?
What are you talking about?
When the far left has set fire to the White House grounds and St. John's Church, ripped the barricades down.
I'm not going to defend that, of course.
Well, right. I mean, so what can we do to make sure that these left-wing activists go to prison for 2 decades?
You're not going to find a tweet for me like defending the people of Stop Cop
I'm not saying
City.
defend it. I'm saying join me in demanding their prosecution.
I'm really enjoying our conversation.
Yeah.
I would appreciate if you'd let me finish my points. You're not going to find a tweet from me like defending Stop Cop City and the alleged racketeering charges. I want to see this borne out in court, but I think if there's a case to be made about people colluding to destroy equipment and vehicles and things like that, that seems to be something that should be passed. You're not going to find a tweet or a statement from me defending any of the violence with Black Lives Matter.
Right,
I am for the rule of law.
Right. So I didn't accuse you of defending.
I'm just
I'm
making
asking,
my statement clear to your audience. So in
I
that
asked,
vein,
what about 529?
if you can find cases to prosecute from that, I have no issue with the justice system acting very aggressively.
So why do you think it is that when leftist activists ripped down the barricades at the White House, set fire to the White House grounds and St. John's Church across the street, we are not getting an inquiry into they forced the president into the emergency bunker.
Yeah.
The medium called him Bunker Boy. Where's our 529 commission in Congress to figure out what happened when these people tried breaching the White House and nearly destroyed a historic church, the presidential church?
So, look, this is just me speculating about this, but one of the things it seems like we found in the aftermath of January 6th is that the procedures at the Capitol for these kinds of events were not where they needed to be, and that we do need cameras and surveillance and law enforcement processes and the mechanisms to bring out the National Guard and things like that. Seems like a lot of things in government, we just probably don't have the infrastructure for that. So if you want to pass a funding bill to create that infrastructure, I would happily support that alongside you.
Well, my point is we have a January 6th commission.
Sure.
Or I don't know if they're calling it a commission, but you had the committee. But we've not got that in the other direction for the Summer of Love riots.
I think that, if you want to put together Republicans to do that, it seems like a political losing issue to me at this point because it's quite a while ago, but go for it.
January 6th was 2.5 years ago. They're still raiding people.
January 6th was terrifying in a way I don't think you're acknowledging.
I think
you're really minimizing
when they firebombed the White House grounds and forced the president to a bunker.
See, it's all equal to you.
You're saying that when people showed up with firebombs and attacked the White House, that was shocking to the soul of this nation in a way we've not seen ever, and you act like it didn't. I have outright
I'm not
said
saying it didn't happen.
that what happened on January 6th was egregious and was extenuating circumstance, and the people who committed violence should go to prison. And then you're shocked that I'm saying the attack on the White House was in some way comparable.
I'm saying, again, it comes back to proportionality, Tim. I think you reach the assessment that you can come up with the example of something that happened on another day, and that's equal to January 6th.
I didn't say equal.
And it leads you, and you're trying to tell your audience to come to the conclusion that January 6th was not as serious as it was. I don't agree with that. I think this is a consistent flaw in your thinking.
I'm not saying Well, I suppose the question is if you think there was a plan for an insurrection, then you have a very low opinion of these people, which is a fine position to have, considering they didn't really have any structure or plan. I mean, you had Jacob Chansley being escorted by the police into the Senate chambers. They told him what to do. He didn't know what he was doing. You had police in the building taking selfies with people. So, I mean, I think all those cops should be in prison, to be completely honest, especially because, I mean, these are the guys who opened the doors.
Yeah.
The people who led Jacob, I think it's like 5 cops led, the shaman. They led him into the Senate chambers by request.
Yeah.
Those cops got to go to prison, and probably for 2 decades, because that's the standard that we're setting here.
Don't you have a little bit of compassion for them that if they're in the middle of a riot where they could be killed, just trying to
you're
calm
conflating
the
2 different things,
situation
though.
down?
Cops on one side of the building who are not SWAT, or who are not riot,
Right.
who are opening a door and letting people in,
Yeah.
and then tell Jacob Chansley, the shaman, yes, we'll bring you to the chambers. Don't worry about it. They could have told him to leave.
Yeah.
He's by himself. I mean, AOC asked this question. She said that they're police who are clearly involved.
Mm-hmm.
She's correct. They're on camera. None of them have been charged.
Okay, I see. I thought you were talking about cops that were trying to quell the situation and working, being friendly. If you're talking about people that are actually colluding with the rioters, yeah.
There was a cop wearing the MAGA hat waving people in. Did you see that?
Okay.
Like,
now I understand what you're talking about.
and they were like, "Oh, he
I
would
agree with that."
I haven't followed that case closely, but they were like, "Oh, but he was just trying to trick the Trump supporters." I'm like, dude, these cops opened the door and took selfies with people and
Sure.
gave them guided access to where they needed to go.
Yeah.
Like, if we're setting a standard, I'm wondering why these people are not being criminally charged.
Can we come back to something you were talking about that I think this again comes down to our difference in philosophy. You said that the CIA, like, so in your mind, what does an intelligence service for the United States look like? How could you do that in a way? Because it seems like you don't believe we should have CIA.
Well, I think if you look at the historical examples and even our cultural understanding of
Right.
the things that these organizations have done, I'm not so convinced that we need a banana republic to happen in Nicaragua so that a corporation
No, of course not.
but these are the things they do. I'm not so convinced that it is the authority of the United States to decide that oil should not be traded in dinar or euro.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not so naive to think that the world is in an active state of peace at any moment. I mean, the world is in active conflict perpetually.
Yeah,
And
it always will be.
So the question we have to ask ourselves is, the function of the United States government and the things we view, I'm saying like, me and my friends,
Right.
more libertarian and anti-war leftist types, we view as abject evil. Do we tolerate these things for, say, the petrodollar? What is the result of the petrodollar? Mass pollution, ocean acidification, mass carbon emissions. If you look at everything we've gotten out of it, I'd say we've quite literally set the world on fire with gluttony, greed, and lust, and we've used a weaponized intelligence apparatus to destroy anyone who opposes it. I can certainly respect the idea that we want to defend America's interests.
Sure.
But are America's interests, multinational corporations pumping out carbon emissions, sending manufacturing overseas to China so they can bypass our regulations,
Right.
and then acidifying the ocean to the point where we're facing fishery collapse, the Pacific garbage patch? What is being perpetuated by the system is the gutting and destruction of human society outside of just the United States. Mm-hmm. So I like that we live in comfort and splendor while producing very little. I enjoy being able to eat avocados in winter and strawberries in winter. The United States has its problems. We've got, like I mentioned, Flint and Pittsburgh and Newark with leaded pipes. Of course, there's always going to be poverty, but oh boy, our poorest people have clean running water they can pick up at a Taco Bell. They've got air conditioning in low-rent apartments. Granted, there are very serious problems with the economy as it is today, but only from an American perspective. The question is, should we maintain our standard of living at the expense of the world, the environment,
Sure.
the climate, and the other countries and
This
other
is
people?
one of the reasons I believe so strongly in the UN and multilateralism and working with other countries and coming to geostability. I remember when I was a young radical, and by the way, you may not know this about me, I protested the Iraq War so much, I ended up on the terrorist watch list.
Wow.
Like, I felt really, really strongly about that. There was a story about the Bush administration over prosecuting people. I obviously never did anything illegal, but I felt really, really strongly about that. So obviously, I agree with you. Like the things we did in Nicaragua and all these other countries and, securing oil around the world, I think that in many ways has been an abuse of power. I also think you have things like, ISIS and Al-Qaeda. One of the successes of the Biden administration has been using our drone program to take these leaders off the battlefield, right? And I do think for a nation like the United States, adults have to look at this and come to the conclusion we do need intelligence agencies out there looking at terrorist cells, looking at the way Russia, here's a good example. When I was running for office, I had to report to the FBI that my emails had been hacked, and we believed Russia was responsible for that, right? Wasn't a government official, but I'm running for an office. You've got to take that seriously. We need agencies to look into this stuff. And I think, again, my critique with your thinking is I think you look at individual instances where I agree with you. There are serious problems, and you conclude the whole thing is just rotten.
So my view is more like a police officer or politician engages in corrupt behaviors.
Sure.
Let's say this. Let's say like there's a corporate officer at a high level who does something bad, and then the corporation goes, but we can't fire him. He's the only guy who can run system ABC. And so we'll talk to him and we'll deal with it internally. At Occupy Wall Street, 2 people were raped. And the organizer at Occupy said, do not report this. Oof. Do not tell anyone. We must take care of it internally.
Right.
So when the CIA and the FBI do these things, my opinion on all of it is the same. You fire the guy, you fire the corrupt cops, you fire the corrupt agencies, but they're being run by corrupt individuals for corrupt reasons. I'm not saying we don't have them at all. I'm saying for like what we have right now, we need to fire.
But how are you any different than the tankies on my own side? We have a huge problem on the left of these people that are, they get the critique of capitalism dead on. I agree with every single word of it. It's about the rich. They capture governmental systems. They tilt the table for themselves. We don't get policies like universal health care because it's like word for word. Agree. Just like I'm agreeing with you on all of these systems having these problems. Where I really differ with you is the tankies. You ask them, okay, so you want the revolution where, capitalism is defeated. How do you design something that figures out what drugs we're going to research? How do you figure out domestic, how do you figure out our trade policy with other countries and what we import? And what we give them as, you start asking these granular questions about how their glorious revolution is going to work. Yeah, you say that this is going to benefit women, right? What are the systems in your glorious revolution that are going to guarantee women have a fair shake at the table? And just respectfully, you get nothing credible.
Well,
it's hand waved away.
I mean, I'm nowhere near that.
But
my thing is
I agree,
hey, here we go.
Your answers,
we
your
fire.
breakdown of it, just fire people. That's not a credible.
But it is. It's called
not a
audit,
credible argument.
Review, termination,
Who
hiring.
audits? Okay, so let's take the CIA for example.
Yeah.
Your magical world. Audit.
Magical world.
Okay.
There's no oversight for the CIA.
Let's say you have a magic wand that can make any process you want happen. What is your specific plan for oversight at the CIA?
Your civilian oversight.
Okay, what does that look like specifically?
You're going to need various individuals, probably multi-partisan. You got to have libertarians. You got to have progressives. You got to have Democrats,
So you're
Republicans.
talking about oversight board. Who appoints them?
Oversight board would probably be appointed through Congress or state representatives. What we would probably want to do is keep it to the state level because we need more state level involvement in federal government. Considering the federal government is mostly people who know each other.
You want Mississippi to have a vote over what the CIA does?
That's how it works. Mississippi sends representatives to Congress who then vote on things. So my view is the state should say, we also will appoint a representative for our intelligence oversight review to report back to us and probably function outside of Congress because we want to make sure that we've got akin to like a special prosecutor, right? So the real issue is...
So hold on, I just want to repeat this back to you. So your vision for oversight at the CIA is we have an oversight board of civilians that are appointed by every single one of the states in the United States?
I don't know about every single state. And I think getting into like can you build me an architecture for a plan right now to deal with CIA corruption is a bit disingenuous.
Your thinking. It's not
right. So I'll give you a broad view.
Problem. Sure.
Civilian oversight
Sure.
through state legislator level cooperation
Okay.
to assess whether or not in our name we are actually being represented, which would be akin to kind of like a special prosecutor version of a legislative review, specifically for the intelligence agencies. We would then determine whether or not, or I should say, my assumption is we're going to clean house and restructure.
Okay.
And we do that through auditing the system. Probably the best way to do it is
who audits
a special
specifically?
legislative session with people who are outside of Congress.
So the federal government would go and set up an audit for the CIA in your view.
So what we would probably have to do is have Congress. Congress would have to vote for a special panel comprised of state delegates or representatives to oversee actions of the CIA, internal documents. Obviously, they're going to need clearance. It's going to be classified, things like that. Then we figure out how to deal with the problems we uncover. Right now, when we look at like Republicans' House oversight, I mean, you look at the people who are in the SCIF and the people who are on these panels, they're working alongside the intelligence agencies. So we're not getting an independent review of what they're doing.
Yeah, I think one of the really good arguments to expand Congress and have more representatives there is the population of the United States has grown so much. We need more people to serve on more committees. So
I wonder if we need like regional Congress. You know what I mean? Like the challenge we're facing is that we are just increasing the amount of people a member of Congress represents. So it's becoming ineffective.
It seems to me that if you're talking about oversight for the CIA, you're talking about getting state level control, that seems to be a recipe for a cluster F as far as not being able to decide anything. Like it seems like that's going to get political really fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
I mean, or we can go the magical route and say Trump go in and just abolish. I mean, I think what the FBI was created by executive order. Yeah, just executive order, they're gone. Or we can go the hard way and say it's got to be outside Congress. They've been ineffective, and we need an audit and oversight.
I don't agree with you. It's been ineffective.
I think it's been completely ineffective. As to cite the humor of, we know the CIA was doing horrible things in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. There's been no reform, and we're going to assume they're doing everything right now.
There have been panels on the intelligence failures after 9/11, which I very strongly agreed. That was the kind of board you're talking about. Oversight, looking at the processes, writing a public report, and people restructuring things in the aftermath of that.
I think, to be completely honest, like my hope for civilian oversight, reform, and auditing is probably the real magical thinking. Because that's stuff that nothing ever changes. And it's not a question of whether I like what's going on or don't like what's going on. It's an issue of public sentiment is growing further and further enraged.
But I think it feels that way because of, respectfully, shows like yours.
It feels that way because people are unsatisfied when the news comes out. I mean, it's a question of gas prices.
Don't you think social media just tells us to have the most reactive, emotionally version of ourselves, getting angry at everything?
Yeah, I think it's insane for anybody who's involved in politics to think they're not playing a role in the greater scheme of the fire maelstrom.
Sure.
I certainly think we are closer to the solution than the problem with what we do at Timcast.
I would love to see that.
Well, I mean, a few simple examples is every time we bring on someone from the left, they get my positions on abortion and taxation incorrect. They get my position on the election incorrect. So if your assumption is that I support a fraud narrative, you are getting fake news from somebody.
I feel like I'm on repeat here. My critique of your show, I don't think you're a bad person, Tim. I've really enjoyed this conversation. My critique of your show is I think you focus on things to a disproportionate amount to the impact that they have on people's lives. And I think you inflame situations with a lot of very personal rhetoric in a way that undermines the ability of our country to solve problems and move forward together.
You're entitled to your opinion.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's about it. I think that my response is, one of the reasons we can't solve the problems in this country, and we're dealing with massive multinational pharmaceutical corporations that are gutting, not just pharmaceuticals, but all of them, gutting, ripping, exploiting, destroying. The reason why we get things like the housing crisis, the reason why we get things like the student debt crisis is because the average person does not pay attention to who's in charge of their country, who's being appointed. They take things immediately at face value, and wolves in sheep's clothing are guiding them to the slaughter. Yeah. So my critique for you is your rejection of blatantly reported facts as conspiracy theory.
It's not
for
rejection.
Tribal reasons.
I'm saying I need to read more about this, and I'm happy to come back on and have a conversation.
So then outside of you personally,
Sure.
we had the example I often give is Hunter Avalone. I don't know what he's doing, but he said the exact same thing. In fact, every single, aside from Destiny, every single left-wing person we've brought on to ask them about the Burisma scandal has said, I did not know Joe Biden said that. And that's fine if you don't. But it is worrisome to me that our position typically here is, if I don't know, I don't know. If I do know, I'll tell you. But the position we find from those on the left is, I don't know, but I think I'm right anyway.
I don't think I've said that today.
Well, the example I'll give is you thought what happened with the impeachment of Donald Trump in Ukraine, with Ukraine, was correct without knowing the finer details of who was involved, why they were involved.
Tim, I think one of the things, again, I don't need to go through this again. I think that I looked at that situation at the time. I came to the conclusion it was a just outcome at the time. I think it's not a burr in my sandal in the same way it is in yours. This is what my point is. And I think if you had asked me back then, I would probably have more specifics to give you feedback on today. What I would suggest, if you want to have a conversation about specific things, have Lisa write out to me, say what you want us to talk about. I'll do all the research. I'll watch all the right-wing clips you want, and I will have a conversation in good faith about that. It's difficult.
It's not a question of fact.
This is something I have found frustrating as I try to enter right-wing spaces and have good faith conversations. That y'all do have your own cinematic universe, and it's difficult for someone who reads the New York Times and Washington Post to catch up on, like, you have a sense of the specifics, but there's individual things that y'all are really angry about, and I just have not followed the storyline that much.
So it's not a question of, do you know this individual story? My point here is, you've taken a political position without knowing what the story is. I'm not talking about one story. I'm saying what we typically experience is, as you asked me about Casey Anthony, I don't know enough about it to comment.
Yeah.
And then every Democrat personality I've spoken to says, I believe in X, but I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't think that's
a really great example
characterization.
is Bill Maher. Dennis Prager goes on Bill Maher's show, I think this was 2018 or 19, and he said, they're putting tampons in men's bathrooms. And he said, this is a lie. And they're saying this. Bill Maher and the entire audience response was to laugh and say it wasn't happening. Instead of saying, I don't know what you're talking about, so it seems weird. Instead, they laugh and they dismiss. And then later Bill Maher was like, oh yeah, well, they were doing that. I guess we should have read more.
I think it's really easy to come to the conclusion everyone is stupid, and you're right if you can just like pop any article in front of them and assume they have not read it. And if they don't know everything,
well, I asked you if you read it.
If they don't know everything in the article, then they're dumb and they're dishonest. Doesn't seem like a great strategy.
But that's not what
me,
I've said.
But it's the conclusion I'm coming to.
I asked you if you've read it.
And
right? And if you say no,
is this
my response is,
man? I said I followed the story at the time. There's specifics.
Right, but I understand that. You're not understanding.
I'm trying to.
What I'm saying is, I did not come out and say, haha, I know for a fact you didn't read this. I said, are you familiar with this story? Are you familiar with these details? You're not. Okay, let me say them. Your response was rejection of these and said I was a conspiracy theorist for making assumptions about it.
That's not what I said. Oh, God damn. Tim, this is not productive. It's just not.
Right. So my point does not need to circle around anything related to Ukraine. It is one side appears to take positions collectively and one side tends to take positions individually.
There's a video out there called Tim Pool Fence Sitter, which, as I understand it, you enjoy, and it talks about your tendency towards looking at two things and to conclude that it's an example, like it's all equal and it somehow all ends up in supporting the right wing. I think it's a consistency in your thinking. I think it's the reason you get so much critique from the left, and I think you've evidenced that very strongly today.
I think you're referring to out of context clips with the intention of generating rage bait.
I'm not trying to do that. I'm talking.
But that's what you're talking about. I mean, like, to come in and be like, will you say there was no fraud? I'm like, are you kidding? I said that November 7th.
Sure.
I said that November 9th. I argue with Steve Bannon on this show 3 times.
Do you notice how often you turn the conversation to, you as a person. I'm trying to
You
talk about
brought me
public
up. You said there was a
policy.
video about me,
My
and I
question
responded
is,
to it.
do you realize how often you turn the conversation to you and what you believe?
You said a video about me came
Sure.
up that exemplified my behavior, to
Right.
which I responded before I was talking about the news. Why did you start talking about me?
Because I don't even remember. It's the
I'm trying to talk
it's
about
crazy.
policy
Sure.
and politicians, and you keep talking about me.
You're talking about leftists as if we're intellectually dishonest. I don't think we are.
No, I said collective approaches to news story assessments versus an individual
Do you
assessment.
really think there are no leftists out there? They're really serious about getting their facts straight. That don't
I didn't say
read
that.
this stuff really seriously. Your statement to me was leftists. You cannot find a single leftist that will come onto this show and understands this stuff. And the conclusion you're telling your audience to draw is if somehow we're stupid or intellectually dishonest. I mean, it's crazy, man.
Taking a collective approach to a news story without having read it.
What does a collective approach mean?
Your assessment that the general direction of January 6th was good,
Yeah.
despite not knowing the granular cases.
I can't name every article. Like, dude,
I'm not arguing
I could
with you.
sit here today and talk about Final Fantasy VIII and the
But
minutia.
I'm not arguing
and
with
the
you that you
minutia
should or shouldn't.
of the systems there. Yeah, I could go, oh, Tim has never played Final Fantasy VIII. He doesn't know this. We know different things. We've read different
Right.
articles. It
I-
is
I don't have an opinion
intellectually
on
dishonest
Final Fantasy
to
VIII.
paint me out as if I've not followed these events when I have.
So, okay, I asked you about Joe Biggs. You said you didn't follow it.
That is correct.
Okay,
and
so my
your
response
critique
is-
was leftists don't admit
No.
when they have not read something.
My
That's what I did
response
right
is
then.
you have taken an assessment of the matter as good without knowing the granular. That's not an opinion or disrespectful. That's not me trying to dig you. I'm saying your view of the situation is a holistic, collective view.
Okay.
This is the big story. It is typically good.
I
My
understand.
approach is here are these individual moments where things are unjust.
Correct.
And so there's a holistic collective view of what the news story is versus individual and granular. That is not to say you did anything wrong.
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'd like to move this to a more productive direction. I wanted to ask you today, are there any bipartisan issues or subjects? Like you claim you're a centrist or you're in the middle, you're not a right winger. I wanted to ask you today, like, are there any issues that you feel really passionate about that you think the left and the right could agree on that you would ask your audience to support?
Making it illegal for members of Congress and maybe even expanding that beyond just
Yeah.
Congress to do stock trading.
Yeah.
Stock
I think that's a
trading
great
and,
idea.
and EFT and all that stuff.
Great idea.
I think we completely agree on that. There are some things that I think we should agree on, but I'm not sure we do. Some progressives are in favor of nuclear power, but I think nuclear energy is the path towards reducing carbon emissions and helping America become more energy independent and being cleaner. That's one. I'm in favor of reforming the tax system. I think we need to lower taxes on the lower end and increase it on the higher end, which would be overly simplified to say tax the rich. I'm probably a little bit closer to Steve Bannon, but Steve Bannon goes into the wealth tax stuff, which is repressive and oppressive. I think goes too far. So I think there's compromise in abortion because I fall in the pro-choice but more traditional pro-choice camp, which was like, you know, we at the point of viability, there's no reason to kill the baby if it can survive on its own. So that's typically where I draw the line. But when it comes to questions of an individual having a medical issue, I don't like the idea of a government regulation form or something to justify it.
Right.
However, we typically find that in the more prominent spaces, if you say I walk up to like Eric Adams as a video, I think it was, I'm not sure, it might have been a lot.
I saw that video. That was wow.
But it's not just Adams, it's Newsom, it's the prominent Democrats saying there should be no restrictions at all.
Do you think so? What elected Democrat believes there should be no restrictions at all? The Eric Adams video you're talking about.
What's
he
her name?
was
Kathy
lamenting.
Tran? Virginia State Senate, who proposed the bill that was in, you know,
Proposed a bill. Someone in a state senate proposed that, but on a.
and then I think it got struck down because I think it got struck down because she was
do you
questioned
really think Democrats directionally don't believe in border control here in the United States? I certainly do.
well, it depends on
It's
how
a
you
national
define
security issue.
it. It depends on how you define it, right? So
How do you want to define it?
so we're talking about gradients, we're not talking about absolutes. We're
Sure.
talking about the left will say it's not as big of a deal. Or I
big
shouldn't,
deal to
the
me.
culture war. I mean, now Eric Adams is saying it's destroying New York City. So it's,
It was I'm not a big Eric Adams fan, but I
but
think
you have sanctuary state policies in California.
in Massachusetts, where I'm from, yeah,
And then what happens is it's not a priority until it's made a priority for them.
sure.
So yeah, of course, they care about it now, the Texas and Florida and Arizona have been sending the
I
migrants
think
to their
there is
states.
a right-wing lie out there that characterizes the left and Democrats in general as not caring about border control policy. I'm old enough to remember at the end of the Bush administration, there was an incident where someone was trying to bring a dirty bomb and smuggle it across the border. And thank God we caught that. That could have been a radiological disaster. It is obviously national security policy. It is our economic policy with people smuggling goods into the United States that shouldn't be here. It is it is such an important issue. And I do believe in a pathway to citizenship and DACA and things like that. But I think it makes sense to take a hard look at to increase the policies, increase the security of how people get into this country.
Yeah,
And I think most mainstream Democrats agree with me. Or at least,
Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, they were all in favor of building what they described as a border barrier.
Yeah.
Expanding it. And then I think when you get into the culture war element of the media, it becomes polarized. But Joe Biden, Benny Johnson just reported this. Joe Biden's expanding the border wall. They've spent a decent amount of money. I don't know to what degree, but there's two stories simultaneously. One is where there are certain fences that were left open and people are just walking through.
Yeah.
And there's another story from Benny where they've actually reinforced some areas. I think for hyper-partisan reasons, people are just picking it's like they're focusing on one element of it and ignoring the other part of it.
Yeah.
I think now with Eric Adams coming out saying this will destroy us, and he's freaking out over it. Yeah, I think people are certainly starting to recognize that, your mainstream Democrat is growing concerned about the immigration crisis.
Well, I wouldn't call him a mainstream Democrat, but I think
New York.
This is one of the things I've found, Tim, and this is the longer I'm in my job. And I just want your audience to notice that when we're sitting down talking about policy, it's a much different conversation than you haven't read this news story, and this is what I feel about you because of that. But one of the things I've discovered about policy is it's impossible for someone to have a comprehensive knowledge of every single area of policy. Our disability policy and how we figure out who gets Social Security and how they qualify for it and what the court system process is for that, for deciding if you get a stipend if you're an adult with a disability, is so complicated. And it's this whole world I had no idea about until, I ran for office. And, I think with, if you're talking about immigration policy at the border, I am sure that if you brought someone in that was an intelligent person that really could answer some damn questions, like how do we stop radiological material from going across the border? Where are all the people coming? Like, how is New York having, what did Eric Adams say, 12,000 people a month coming in?
Yeah.
How is that happening? Like, I think if you start to understand those problems, I think that you can find smart people in government that are committed to solving it.
So we've gone way over, but I do want to ask just one final question. January 6th was really bad.
Yeah.
You described it as an insurrection.
Yeah.
CNN right now shows Trump polling above Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. And right now, the general assessment from analysts and politicos is that while it is nearly a statistical tie, Trump has the edge. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden's favorability is down. There's currently efforts there's a debate in New Hampshire, which may have been resolved, a lawsuit in Florida. There's a debate in Arizona, may have been resolved, and now a lawsuit in Colorado to remove Trump's name from the ballot.
Yeah.
There are procedural efforts being taken place under the argument that Trump tried to overthrow the government. Mm-hmm. I'm curious what you think happens if Trump wins or loses.
So I was saying this on Twitter, and I got a lot of backlash from leftist Twitter. I'm not a lawyer, but I think like my gut instinct is telling me that if you are trying to keep someone off the ballot, that I think just the gut reaction from a lot of people, I think it feels kind of dirty and dishonest to a lot of people. So I'm sure there's an excellent constitutional case for this, but I have a long way to go before I personally believe this is a really good idea. And, I can't remember who was talking about this. Was it George Conway? Somebody was talking about how, imagine we woke up on 2024 and the reason that Trump lost, if he is the nominee, is because he couldn't get on the ballot in one of these states. I think if you're trying to turn the temperature down in a democracy and make people believe in the rule of law, I think that my friends are discounting how this is going to impact people. And I think the difference between the Justice Department bringing cases against Trump when there's a lot of evidence for it, I think that's a very different situation than someone who can bring a lawsuit or not bring a lawsuit, choosing to do that.
If is it fair to say your view is that Trump tried to overthrow the seat of power, or that's how it's been described in the media?
I
don't
can't
want to
say it for sure until he's convicted in one of these cases. I think there's ample evidence to bring a court case.
But January 6th was an insurrection.
Yeah.
So what do you think happens if Trump loses? These people, in your view, have already waged insurrection.
Sure.
Do you think they simply just say, well, good game?
I think that what you and I both have a responsibility to do is to calm the temperature down. And I think we've got to double down on democracy and the rule of law and making people, like, correcting the flaws in our system in a non-inflammatory way, and to treasure our democracy. Again, we've had peaceful transfer of power for 200 years in this country.
I agree, but my question is not what we should do, because I agree with you, but what do you think these people, if right now today we held the election,
sure,
Trump's name, let's say it's removed from one state.
Yeah.
Do you think these people continue the pattern of behavior that they engaged in?
I think there are a certain number of people out there that are going to engage in domestic terrorism. I do.
What do we do as a country if that starts?
I think they're going to meet their fate in a court of law. But I think the way to avoid that happening is to turn down the rhetoric.
So we've consistently maintained, when you look at all of the cultural endeavors that are taking place and the victories that the right is actually gaining, the stupidest thing anyone can do is any kind of violence, any kind of riot. Or, I mean, right now, the best path forward is knocking on doors and just leafleting.
Yeah.
Trump lost 2020 by only 42,000 votes. Despite the fact that the popular vote was skewed pretty heavily, it was 3 swing states that totaled 42,000. Trump won by 77. It's close. So the opportunity for people on the right who are upset is to stop thinking you can't win. Start realizing you almost did twice, and you can win again.
In Georgia, I personally ran ads in Georgia, like just Trump statements, don't vote. I put that out to everyone out there we could. It was a wildly effective message.
Yep, it was his, and so my concern, however, is when you look at 2016, they accused Trump of being a Russian spy. Jonathan Chait actually went on MSNBC and said maybe going back to the Soviet era, Trump may have been secretly colluding with the KGB or something like that. And it resulted in a $30+ million investigation and restrictions placed on, to a certain degree, legal, but also political, what Trump could or couldn't do.
Yeah.
These were false.
Yeah.
It was shockingly absurd, and it was devastating to the confidence in our country that, with the Clintons' funding of the Steele dossier and these other fictitious political attacks, the Democrats tend to play things like rogues, and Republicans tend to play things like warriors or fighters, brawlers.
Rogues? What do you mean specifically by that?
A charismatic and charming, perceptive individual who figures out how the system works so they can persuade you into the
How
actions.
did Bush win again in 2000? Can you remind me of that?
Brute force.
Legal tricks in Florida,
Oh, I'm not saying that.
Dade County.
I'm saying just as of right now, if you look at 2016, what did you get? The Democrats used perception, persuasion, deception. January 6th is brute force, right?
I don't follow what you're saying at all. I apologize.
Trump is not a Russian agent.
I think
that's been adjudicated. He's not.
Trump is someone who is so full of himself. There are these stories of Vladimir Putin. He has no respect for Donald Trump. He doesn't like this guy. He thinks he's an idiot. There are stories of him deliberately bringing like young, beautiful Russian translators to meetings with Vladimir Putin, and then Trump is all horned up and staring at the woman the whole time.
But
Vladimir Putin is laughing about that. Sure.
We adjudicated this. We investigated this. There's no evidence that Donald Trump was secretly colluding with Russia. Many of these stories were outright incorrect.
My point is, it's not Trump is saying they're taking bribes for Russia. It's saying he's a useful idiot for the Kremlin.
Right. The accusation made with like Alpha Bank, for instance, fake story, fake news, that Donald Trump was secretly engaged in transactions, This is the roguish way to weigh down, block up, or, insurrect, as you were.
Tim, there are serious people that care about national security in this country and our foreign policy and geostability worldwide that believe in NATO, that are looking at Donald Trump's closeness to Vladimir Putin. And when he came
But this
out,
is not my point.
hold on. And when
But
he
you're
came
derailing.
out and said, I believe Vladimir Putin more than our own intelligence agencies. That is a very serious situation. And there are people that are worried about Trump's ties to Russia.
And the story emerged in the campaign in 2015. It was fake. We know it was fake. It was investigated. It's not true. And people won awards for it. They put a special prosecutor in place. Tens of millions of dollars were spent, and it was muddled nonsense. In fact, you ended up like Michael Flynn, for instance. His lying to the FBI is psychotic. I mean, the degree of corruption. He wasn't even under investigation nor in a formal interview.
You think Michael Flynn is honest? Really?
Michael Flynn, in his prosecution, I'm not speaking about anything else. He was in an informal discussion where he answered some questions off the cuff and they accused him of lying and threatened to arrest him. We know that I think it was Kevin Kleinsmith fabricated evidence, manipulated to get Papadopoulos investigated. These things are serious degrees of corruption that need to be investigated. I think Kleinsmith got in trouble. I'm not sure exactly what happened, though.
I think
Kleinsmith was
every reason for Americans to be concerned about the degree to which Russia seems to be aligned with the degree to which people in the Republican Party seem to have taken up Kremlin talking points. I think the best case scenario is Russia has been very effective in bringing people onto their side just by connecting with them. And I think the worst case scenario is I think we have traitors in the United States.
I mean, that's probably true at any point in history. There's people who get caught selling. There was like a couple just got caught selling nuclear secrets or something. But my point is not to get into the nitty gritty of Russia. It's that there is no acceptance by the Democrats or the Republicans of the outcome of the election.
I accepted it.
If Donald Trump, so when Donald Trump won, I'm not speaking for you. I'm saying we had years of coverage of Trump being a secret Russian spy. After Donald Trump loses, we get the fraud narrative. We get storming of the Capitol. You get these claims that Trump's secretly president and the weirdest things. I don't see how after 2024, no matter what happens, you're going to have people accepting. If Trump wins, I mean, you had in the Boston Globe, it was reported that prominent Democrats and Republicans came together for a war game. Are you familiar with this one, this story? And the suggestion was to the Democrats that if Donald Trump doesn't cede policy, they actually secede Western states from the Union. This was the game played by them. I was shocked that they would say such a thing to the Boston Globe. With those things being taken into consideration, if Trump wins, I don't see things being procedurally sound. If Trump loses, I don't see the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th simply being like, good game, guys. In what scenario do the people who stormed the Capitol decide, okay, this time around everything's fine and Democrats are
we agree
legitimate?
there are going to be domestic terrorists. There's two things here. This is what we're again coming back to. You look at the good faith efforts in media to look at Trump's ties to Russia, and it is factual that his worldview seems to terrifyingly mirror Vladimir Putin, right? To have serious NatSec concerns and to cover that, which is the media's job. Reasonable people can be worried about that. Reasonable people can be upset about January 6th. You're presenting a narrative to your audience that this means the whole system is corrupt. I think it's a lot simpler. I think Donald Trump himself is corrupt.
My view is you think Donald Trump is corrupt and they think Joe Biden is corrupt.
That's fine.
And there's no reconciliation. There's nothing I can say to convince you that you're wrong.
That's untrue, Tim. That is absolutely untrue. So let's say this goes to court. Let's say there's the Republicans, like they're talking impeachment proceedings. If you brought up evidence of this with Hunter Biden, I've said from the beginning, dead consistently, throw him in jail. They have no issue.
I'm not talking about Hunter, though. I'm talking about Joe.
I know.
Should Joe be sent in prison?
If a committee goes and finds, like from the video you played, that there's actual intent there, and you want to impeach him, if there's malfeasance in this White House, my position is we need to be prosecuting more politicians.
Sure. Would you agree with a Republican panel impeaching Joe Biden and convicting him for these charges?
If I swear to God, I don't know if you can tell this about my personality. I would follow that story and I would look at it honestly. And if the evidence were there, I would agree with that. Democrats are actually pretty good at throwing their own people under the bus.
Sure. So my position is not about you individually. I just think when you look at the state of politics over the past 7 years, I have not seen something to suggest that at the conclusion of the 2024 election, America comes together and carries on like normal.
I disagree. I think
you think the January 6th people are going to just chill out.
A friend of mine made a joke to me because I was talking about being in Maryland. They were like, the statement, the thing is touch grass. Tim Pool has touched too much grass. And I think that I think that you are extremely online enough that you have a warped perception about the country. And I do think there are a certain number of people in 2024, if we are successful, that are going to engage in domestic terrorism. I think law enforcement should be ready for that. I think that number is much smaller than I think your appraisal of it is.
I think I assume that your view of my view is predicated upon a lack of understanding of historical Civil War and Revolution.
Okay.
So one thing I often hear when it comes to this degree of conflict, I think we had like 1,000 people on January 6th. Mm-hmm. You had something like 200 to 300,000 in DC for the rally itself. And then I think it might be like 800 that were party to the storming of the front of the Capitol, the riot and all that stuff. It's a question of how many people are involved in this. We were talking about this last night, the American Revolution, like how it began, how many people were involved. It was actually a ridiculously small number of people that sparked.
I live in Boston.
A war.
Yeah.
It was. What did they have? A couple hundred redcoats in Boston to maintain the Intolerable Acts because the colonial government was like, this is unjust, and it resulted in a bunch of farmers outside of Boston saying, we are not going to abide by the rule of the crown.
Sure.
They enacted the Suffolk Resolves, where they basically had a bunch of random locals. What happens? The redcoats decide we're going to seize the weapons from these individuals because they should not be forming militia. We now call that the shot heard round the world, the start of the American Revolution, despite the fact it was basically just a handful of cops trying to seize weapons from some farmers.
Sure.
When it comes to what happens after this is the shot heard around the world. The word goes around that a bunch of local farmers took up arms and shot at a bunch of cops.
Right.
And then the narrative quickly shifts. Now people are scared. Not only violence. Before this, no one thought the violence could escalate. First of all, nobody thought anyone would go.
No one thought colonialism, violence could escalate for British colonial policy. I think many people thought
it's actually the assessment at the time among most journalists, political leaders, prominent figures was revolution's not possible. No one is going to fight the crown. And what the founding fathers had been consistently doing was petitioning, sending letters and making arguments. And the Declaration of Independence came a year after the battle at Concord and Lexington. The sentiment changed. People were shooting at each other now. Even the Boston Massacre, which is considered a major component of the American Revolution, was not considered a war. Only a few people died. In Lexington and Concord, I think it was 18 people ended up dying in the conflict, one redcoat. But my point is that...
So conclusion you're trying to tell your audience is...
Here's a historical event of what
happens. The election is going to result in chaos and few people can take it over. So be ready. Is that your basic message?
My statement is I do not see a scenario where Trump supporters stop doing what they're doing, nor do Democrats stop doing what they're doing.
Well, you know what? At a certain point, if you are going to engage in terrorism, you're going to go to jail.
And you deserve to.
Yeah.
100%.
So what's the alternative, Tim? It's not like...
Nobody wants... look, there are people who want it to happen, but they shouldn't.
I like the fact that Donald Trump acted like such a child after he lost the election that we now have to pursue these court cases that are deeply damaging to our democracy. It's a lose-lose situation. If we do nothing, it signals to everyone out there that, hey, attempts to hijack an election are 100% okay. If we engage in the rule of law, it sends the message that, that we're one step closer to making people not believe in democracy, man.
Let me, I forget the name of this. Do you know Shays Rebellion? There it is, Shays Rebellion. So are you familiar with Shays Rebellion?
I live in Boston, Tim.
Right. I think that's historical precedent that actually the solution right now would be for Joe Biden to pardon the January 6ers who already spent 2.5 years in prison and outright say, please work with us. I think 2.5 years is long enough, and we don't want to exacerbate tensions in this country.
Yeah.
Joe Biden should, in my opinion now, I think this would dramatically de-escalate things.
I think
If-
that's not a bad idea.
If he said time served for everyone involved, let's have a conversation.
I think you'd have to
Maybe not the
be
pipe bomb guy.
selective about who you did that for. Like the people, like one of the things I found really troubling is after a lot of these court cases, they come out and they're pumping their fist or doing things that seem to indicate they have no remorse. But I think if you can find some people that are genuinely apologetic for what they're doing, I would not have any issue with that.
I don't think they need to be apologetic at all. I think
Really?
I think it's a Chinese finger trap problem that by Enrique Tarrio going
Be
to prison.
gentle to domestic terrorists?
It's a leap to call it domestic terrorism.
They tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power, Tim.
A handful of people, but would you call Shays Rebellion a bunch of domestic terrorists?
I think
So I'm
the
citing
founding
this.
fathers were absolutely terrorists. And
Well, sure.
yeah,
Okay, fine.
yeah.
If that's the word,
Yeah.
if that's how you want to describe it.
I mean,
my point is,
I mean it sarcastically, but I think the British Empire would have, like Samuel Adams, he was a radical propagandist.
there are two key moments I think we can see in our history
Yeah.
that suggest the appropriate move forward to help this country is for Joe Biden to pardon the J6ers. 2.5 years time served. People have already been in prison for a long time. You've got Shays Rebellion, a blanket pardon for all those who fought against the government. Why? We cannot start a country fighting amongst ourselves over unpaid debts, etc. And then you also had the election of, I think it was 1876, which it was a contentious, determining what electoral votes to count resulted in a committee between Democrats and Republicans, an agreement made to end the Reconstruction era in exchange for an amicable path forward for how the country would be governed for this next election cycle. Right now, we're looking at people who outright are saying that the election was stolen still to this day.
Yeah.
Owen
And they're wrong.
Schroyer's sentencing guidelines from the prosecutors explicitly cite his speech afterwards as justification for why he should go to prison for 3 months. This is not simmering things down. This is pouring gasoline on the fire.
The problem, Tim, is we have a right-wing ecosystem that has we have a right-wing media ecosystem that's amped things up and told people they're the victim. And we are now in this situation where you have domestic terrorists and people trying to stop the peaceful transfer of power. And we're trying to treat them like children.
Are you talking about
Hold on, let me finish
the
my
left or
point.
the right, though?
I'm talking about the domestic terrorists that tried to take over the country on January 6th and stop the peaceful transfer of power. And we're put in this situation of we can't talk to right-wingers like adults. There are some people on the right. Mike Pence, I don't agree with the guy on a lot, but his statements in the Republican presidential primary the other day, I really appreciated the integrity that he talked about on that day. I think that we are in a hellish situation where there are a ton of media commentators inflame, tell people they're the victim. And they make it so they don't believe in democracy. I think you've played a huge role in this.
I think your position is we will never compromise.
I just said, if you want to pardon them, I'm open to that. But I think
Right.
at some point,
But
yeah, Tim, so
Let me answer
Yeah,
what you just said,
Go
me
ahead.
playing a role.
sure.
My position is, what say you, good sir? They say, here are all the things they're doing to us. I've met people, I'm saying, like, I will ask someone, and they'll say, I met a woman recently, and she said, we didn't even know anything happened at the Capitol. We were walking around D.C. Well, what is the average person supposed to do? Be on the news 24/7? And so
Oh, they were in Washington, just out and about.
a woman
Okay,
walking around in D.C. with her husband,
yeah.
sometimes
DC's a big place.
very big place,
Yeah.
and a lot of people go to the Capitol.
Yeah.
They're a family of people who live in a moderately suburban, rural, suburbanish area, and they're moderates leaning Republican. And what she said was, sometime just before 4, they had gone to the Capitol on the side of the building. They had seen no violence, no fighting, no broken glass, no fences. They didn't even know anything had happened. There were something like 250,000 people who were there for a rally.
Mm-hmm.
Most people weren't watching the news on their phones. They're just walking around.
Right.
She walks up to the building, looks around. There's cops They're waving people in and things like this. This is well after the fighting had resolved. And they shrug. They were there on the grounds for a total of 6 minutes, and they left. Feds burst into their house, arrested them as insurrectionists. They didn't even know that they were wanted for anything or they'd done anything wrong. Their immediate approach was to apologize and say, we're so sorry about this.
Sure.
The judge said, so you admit you were part of a mob. You are guilty. And now they're facing a year and a half.
I think if I looked into this situation, I'd probably reach a different perception.
How about the man who was
way
acquitted?
You are spinning this.
Okay.
Tom.
How about the man who was acquitted by the judge? No. Hold on. You can't just say my stories are right, your stories are wrong.
I'm not.
I am not telling you this is definitively
it doesn't
true.
Sound credible.
Did you know that there was a man who was acquitted in a bench trial?
I'm sure there are many people that have been acquitted over January 6th.
Because there's a video of the cops motioning him to come in the building. And the judge, so this person, right, has the story of I'm raided by the feds and I was found not guilty.
Great.
These stories exist.
Sure.
I am not telling
That
you
sounds
to,
like the
I'm not telling you to
Justice
believe
Department
them.
working.
I'm not
its
telling
way
you to
out.
believe them. I'm telling you that if I go to someone and they say this thing happened to me and your response is you're spinning it and you're wrong, that's the conflict.
That's not my statement. You're mischaracterizing what I just said to you.
You just said I'm probably spinning
it. I said that story does not sound credible to me, and I suspect that if I looked into that situation, I would probably understand there's more to the story than what you're saying.
And that's not my point.
Evidenced by the fact that they were found guilty.
And that's not my point. My point is, if you're adjudicating a dispute between parties, and your position is, I'm assuming there's something more to this, and that's it.
Right.
You are on one side of that dispute.
I'm on the side of believing, like, the only fact I really have here is the Justice Department, the justice system came to a guilty verdict, right? So that seems to me like, as far as like if I were writing that in the newspaper, the moment a guilty verdict is found, that's the time you don't say alleged murderer, you say murderer.
Sure.
Like it's a fact at that point.
So my point here is not whether or not someone
But it's
did or
not
didn't do
to
anything
you.
wrong.
It's not to you. You still maintain that
There are innocent people in prison.
you reach the conclusion over and over. It feels like you're minimizing January 6th. I think anyone watching
We're talking
this
about
is
an
gonna come to
individual
that
case.
conclusion.
It's not the same as me saying like the people who are violent should be in prison.
Sure.
Right? I'm talking about an individual case. I am not talking about whether you think they're right or wrong. My point is, if someone comes to you and says, these are the things I've experienced that they're doing to us. I say, I hear what you're saying. I'll then go and talk to you. And you'll say, here are the things I'm seeing and what I'm worried about. I go, that's very interesting. I'm then told by you that I'm making a false equivalence. I'm not here to determine that you are correct or the January 6er who feels persecuted is correct. I'm here to tell you that it doesn't matter what you think is true. It matters what everyone decides to take as true. So if Justice Smollett, for instance, it matters if it's
By the
true.
way, you cannot find any statement from me ever supporting him, because that story, this actually speaks to the opposite of your point. That story smelled like BS from the word go to me. And I said to myself,
But I'm not talking about you.
Hold on. This is because I think this is bad faith, respectfully. Jesse Smollett is something, this is a situation where it came out in the news. I go, oh, I just flat out don't believe that. And I was very strategic and careful to be quiet about that, because I do take truth.
Right.
Seriously.
I'm not talking about you.
Sure.
I'm saying.
But you're making it out like there's no evidence with the January 6th people.
That's not what I'm saying at all.
Innocent, that I would agree to lenience there. And that's not the case.
In fact, the people admitted they trespassed. That's why they got charged.
Sure.
That's why they got convicted. So there's direct evidence in their statements that we're sorry, we didn't realize. And they said, too bad. But that's not my point.
But let's flip this around, though.
But
what
I'm trying to
evidence
finish.
could exist to convince you that Trump is fundamentally corrupt?
I mean, that's a broad, open, like Trump could go out into the middle of the street and kick a dog in the face.
Okay, so that's the limit.
No, I mean, there's a plethora of things, but I'm trying to make a point.
I want to come back to this. Though.
Right, come back to it. My point is this. Jussie Smollett happens.
Sure.
And there are two worldviews in the immediate, for which you're not party to, and I'm not criticizing you. Television actors, movie stars, everyone came out and said, this is true. It was not true. I mean, you had Big Bang Theory did a big display for the guy.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
The immediate assumption is this guy is a poor victim.
Sure.
On the right, something smells strange and is not correct.
Right.
This comes to it's a less serious story. Eventually, the dude is
think it's pretty serious faking a hate crime.
But he didn't get in any, like, he got in trouble. I mean, it messed his career up for sure. He should go to prison.
Didn't he go to jail about that? Or
He got like a
am I
slap on the
misremembering
wrist.
that?
They dropped a bunch of the charges. There was a contentious argument.
It's too bad.
And I think, yeah, I can't remember exactly what's happening. But this comes to disparate worldviews and trust that
Right.
exist in this country.
Sure.
It doesn't matter whether or not in the political space what Justice Smollett said was true. What mattered is Ellen Page at the time, now Elliot Page, went on TV and said, this happened, and for this, we will. So even though something happened that wasn't true, the political ramifications were exorbitant. This is true across the board. If a Trump supporter gets arrested, you could have definitive proof. I mean, this guy's dirty as they come. But if the narrative that emerges, for whatever reason, conflicts, and they all seem to be doing it, it doesn't matter what is true in the political sense. It always matters what's true in the moral sense. It matters that people are going to respond as if it's true no matter what.
Right. And the antidote to that is to get people to take a breath. And this is something I really respect Destiny for, to teach people how to think about problems. Like, the most radical thing you can be in 2023 is not a punk or communist or tanky or right-winger. It's someone who critically thinks through arguments before deciding what you want to believe, right?
I agree.
Is willing to hold your own side accountable when you F up. So I think that the answer to this, Tim, is for all of us to have a much higher standard of what we retweet, what we believe, to have sourcing on things that aren't this like litany of garbage sites, to be more thoughtful about all of that. And I think this is something, respectfully, I don't think you do a good job on.
I only use NewsGuard certified sources.
Okay.
If you can't agree on a standard, then there's nothing to be said,
You
right?
retweet a lot of videos that are unsourced. You make a lot of, like, here's a good example. The other day, and God, actually, I know people want me to get into the whole thing where you were like, oh, and I know they're probably making this thing up about Obama being gay. I don't care. It's the Democrats. I know DGG really wants me to talk about that. I don't even want to get into you
About
again.
what?
Right.
Me saying it's a BS story and it's probably
Yeah,
not
but you
true.
wanted
and-
to talk about it anyway.
I mean, it's
Yeah, because
headline
it makes
news
the
with
Democrats look
55.
bad.
That's not true at all.
Yeah,
We actually did not lead with that story the day that the interview dropped.
it's
We actually didn't lead with it the day the
okay.
the trailer dropped.
This is what I just said.
This is the
I
thing.
don't want to get into.
No,
another
you know,
thing
this is the
adjudicating
issue.
you.
It's
Yeah.
you must ignore what we tell you to ignore or address what we tell you to address. I did not lead my show with the Obama allegations.
Sure.
We talked about a story that's got 55 million views, to which I said it is
Probably
WWE
not true.
garbage that
Yep.
doesn't need to be made, and Tucker should not have done it.
Right.
And I'm
then
getting
you said,
criticized?
I'm going to talk about. Look, I'm trying to step away from this because
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't go anywhere productive. We've seen that over and over again. I'm saying that
It's
your
bad faith.
comments there. It's not bad faith. Man. I'm trying to step away, but if you want to go here, we can. Actually, do you just want to drop it and move on? I'll show you the Reddit link after the show, and we can talk about it.
Outside of any particular story,
Yeah.
the point I want to address is I make a video where I say the military industrial complex is bad. They're
Yeah.
doing revolving door contracts, and the left insults me for it.
Okay.
I should say this. Prominent left-wing personalities with some of the largest audiences insult me when I agree with them.
I think I hear what you're saying. I respect it. I think there are a lot of people in media that being in the public eye is very destructive for your mental health. I've certainly seen that. It's easy to become resentful about the way you're portrayed, and I hear what you're saying.
That's not the issue at all.
Sure.
The issue is a false narrative is created over my views on elections, abortion, taxation, intervention, in order for someone to get clicks and make money, which then results in people talking to me and saying things like, it's remarkable that people make the assumption that I'm like, the right does this. They say Tim's an atheist. And I'm like, what? Never said that. The left says I'm pro-life. And I'm like, I've never been pro-life.
Yeah.
But it's because someone will take a clip, alter its context, because it gets them traffic and makes them money.
Sure. I understand you feel that way.
I'm sure people do it to you.
They do it to all of us. This
Right.
is what they do it to Jank. They do it to Sam Cedar. They do it to Vosh. They do it to Destiny. They do it to Emma. I mean, this is just, it's part of being a public figure. It's awful.
Yeah.
Right? It's crazy to me. So many young people want to be famous when, I've got like the lowest level of fame you can have, which is feminism fame, and it's just ruins your life, right?
Yeah, I mean, you'd be better off, I don't know, selling paintings. Be famous in anything other than politics. People still hate you, though.
People think this makes you happy. What ends up happening is there's a shadow version of you that gets created, and everyone out there will believe anything bad about you if it adheres to a narrative, and it is deeply destructive to your psyche. And I see that today as I'm talking to you. So
I disagree with that.
you disagree this has damaged you?
Yeah.
Okay.
That feels to me like an emotional attack, right?
I'm not attacking you. I'm saying I have empathy because I understand what it's like to be under attack. It's damaged me. I have to imagine.
My concern over.
Like, you hear me here. I'm not attacking you. I'm trying to empathize, right?
So then I would say I think your perspective of my issue is in the wrong direction.
Okay.
My issue is when people lie about things for political power or financial gain.
Sure.
And whether it's me or Obama or Cenk or anyone, I take personal issue and offense to the lies. So, for instance, I called out Leading Report when they tried to manufacture a narrative on the COVID vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
That pisses me off.
Right.
And so I will say, this is not true.
Sure.
Here's the real context. So whether it's me or anyone else, my issue would be, I won't engage with people who do that.
Right.
There's two varying degrees, right? You have to have conversations with people who are going to do things.
What I hear you're telling me is you feel like you, from your perspective, show a great deal of integrity. You feel like there's an ecosystem out there that profits from distorting what you say. And I hear you on that. I personally, the things I've seen on you directionally have seemed like fair critiques, but I'm sure there are some examples you could bring up. I just, I'm less interested in adjudicating who you are as a person. I mean, it's just not relevant to public policy.
I agree. It doesn't. The focus of this is not what I deal with.
Right.
The focus is what you deal with and what everyone deals with, and how we are supposed to solve political issues when, the industry is to lie.
Right.
It's just everyone's going to take things out of context, manipulate them.
So how do we solve the culture war? This is utterly unwinnable.
Oh, that's why I tell people the key to winning is to knock on doors.
Yeah.
Go vote.
Great.
Start a business.
Great.
Protect your family. Focus on your kids. Make money. Be successful. And support companies that support your values.
Yeah.
And that's all you have to do. And the last thing anyone should be doing is any kind of fighting or violence. In fact, I even said people shouldn't protest in front of the court when Trump was being arraigned. And I said, if you do, you should be on your knees with your hands cuffed in a visual protest of what was going on. Do not create an open door for any kind of escalation or violence.
I want to come back to something you said we could do earlier. So you've accused me and the left multiple times today of, I don't want to say intellectual dishonesty, that's too strong, but like talking as if there's no point where I could reach a conclusion, right? And I gave you multiple examples of where that's not true. I think Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, if you could find out he's done something truly that shows collusion there, I would welcome a court case there. In fact, it'd probably be good for the Democrats because then we'd have a new nominee for 2024.
Gavin Newsom.
Hold on. He's very good. So what is something that theoretically could happen that would lead you to the conclusion that Trump is a fundamentally dishonest person?
Right.
Yeah.
But there's an infinite number of answers to that.
Okay. The classified document story didn't do that for you?
The classified document story is, look, Donald Trump has a 51% from me. I like some of the things he's done. I like foreign policy. I like the Abraham Accords.
Sure.
I like North Korea.
Okay.
I thought the economy was pretty good in 2019. He did a lot of really dumb things. He had a lot of really bad people. He hired John Bolton. I didn't vote for him in 2016.
Sure.
I'm not going to vote for Joe Biden. I'd vote against him.
Okay.
The Obama administration was deeply corrupt. I don't think Donald Trump is. I don't know. What do you call him? He's the. What do they say? He's the worst of our culture, and Hillary Clinton was the worst of our politics. And so these are the choices that people had.
Right.
Donald Trump tried to hold the G7 meeting at his own golf resort. and made the claim that this would save money for the government.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would also provide cost revenue measures for his golf resort. And he said, yeah, but we're not going to charge money. Yeah, but it covers the costs of your employees. If you're not booked, you're losing money. Even if you book them at cost, that's a conflict of interest. Trump backed off
He was
that.
getting people to fly a huge distance to go to that golf resort that was
And then
way
it-
out of everyone's way.
And it got canceled
Yeah.
because people like me and many others were like, that's BS.
Okay.
You can't do that.
Okay, great.
You've also-
my question, I feel like you're getting off course here. Look, if you look at the totality of the Trump administration, which you got to admit, it had a lot of scandals. Like, what is something that could happen to lead you to the conclusion, like, it's not that the Justice Department is crooked, it's that we're dealing with someone that is fundamentally a criminal?
Right. There's an infinite number of answers to that question. It's how do you answer that? A photo gets released of Trump brutally murdering somebody to cover up a crime.
Okay, so he murders someone.
Trump it puts on a video. How about this? A video of Trump jumping into the front of the beast and grabbing the steering wheel and screaming, "Go back to the Capitol."
Okay.
Because the media said he did that. The media said that on January 6th, Donald Trump reached for the
He's
steering
with
wheel.
the Secret Service. Yeah.
He was in the
okay, I'm
beast,
remembering what
but
you're
there's
talking
a
about. Yeah.
partition,
Yeah.
and so this story is like,
Right. The Secret Service, according to that story, said they had to restrain Trump because he tried to grab the wheel to get back to the Capitol. Right?
which is impossible in a vehicle with a partition.
Okay.
Right. So like, the first challenge is,
This was
I don't-
something in a story, by the way.
it
Like,
was the
yeah,
lead story. Like Trump wanted to go back to the
It
Capitol
was
and engage
color
it.
in a story, a wider story about those protests.
So the first issue is what I was trying to say initially is that I don't have a very favorable, like a very high favorable view of Trump as it is.
Yeah.
So it's not a high bar for me to be like, oh
Really?
yeah, I bet
You're
he.
doing stuff with Donald Trump Jr. Seems
But,
like
what-
you
but,
do.
but Trump Jr. as an individual versus Trump Sr. as and I mean the sins of the father. There's a lot of questions there. And besides, sitting down with the son of the president for a live conversation is not like the dude and I are going to play golf together and jumping in there and high fiving in celebration.
Well, you're making money from the event, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we're having someone who is going to provide his perspective and insight, the same as we have you, or Jackson Hinkle, or Vosh, or Charlie Kirk.
Would you hold an event with, Jill Biden in the same way?
Absolutely. Oh man, I wish. We've been trying to get Marianne Williamson for forever.
Oh, yeah.
And she's somewhere. We've tried to get Bill Maher, tried to get the Young Turks. We've tried to get Sam Cedar. We've also reached out to the squad.
So
That's never going to happen.
you would have Sam Cedar back now.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to say somebody else. Cenk Uygur. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. No. The issue I take with Sam is that he's engaged in too much.
I've heard it
performative.
10 times.
I know. Right.
Yeah.
Trump Jr. is welcome to come and sit down. We got Patrick Bet-David and Matt Gaetz as well. These are the people that
Republican.
is Patrick Bet-David a Republican?
Is he not? Am I hallucinating that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if his whole Patrick Bet-David's like an entrepreneurship.
He's pretty right wing, the whole show. Cenk was on it the other day.
Yeah, but I wonder if the question is, does the left view anyone not left as right wing? I don't know
I don't
Patrick
think
Bet-David's
that's my
positions,
assessment.
right?
Okay.
We would literally, we'd have everybody. But to the question of
You would host an event. Would you host a fundraiser for Elizabeth Warren?
a fundraiser,
Yeah.
Why would I do a fundraiser for
I
her?
don't know. Just
I would
asking.
absolutely invite her onto a panel on stage that people could pay tickets to come attend.
Okay. Fair enough.
That'd be she can walk to my front door, knock on the door. Elizabeth Warren is welcome to come to this house at any point. Knock on the door. In fact, I am hereby giving Elizabeth Warren permission to literally walk into my house. It's an office. I don't live here. But
She's my senator. She can text me.
she can walk on in,
Yeah.
sit down in the chair anytime, and we'll have a conversation.
Yeah, Elizabeth Warren is a really good example of somebody in politics I think really gets a bad rap. And I think this is how the process really distorts who people are and what they stand for. When you see Elizabeth Warren in person, and she's my senator, I've been to a ton of events with her. She is warm, charismatic. She's the best people person I've ever seen, like work in a crowd. Sharp on policy issues, laser focused, and then you look at how the right-wing spin machine takes her and turns her into Pocahontas and the serial liar that's making up stuff, and she's just like the most dedicated, good faith servant for Massachusetts you could possibly imagine.
So anybody's 99.9% of people we are welcome. The only stipulation we've ever had
But
is
you mostly have right wingers.
do you think we just don't invite the left? We invited you, right?
You did,
You're
but
one of like
I was
four.
walking up the stairs. I couldn't see a single left winger.
That's not
for
true.
your-
Vosh is right there.
Oh, Vosh is there.
Vosh is
Okay.
right there.
Excellent.
And I think Destiny might be there.
Vosh is a good guy.
And there's a handful of people who are totally apolitical that
Yeah.
are up there as well. But we have Enrique
So you
Tarrio,
have
Steve
two
Bannon, Alex Jones.
leftists and some apolitical people.
Absolutely. And so ask yourself why they don't come on the show.
I think that it's intimidating.
Like we invited you.
Yeah. It's intimidating to come into right wing spaces, just to be really honest with you. And look at my Twitter when I announced this. I would say the number of people that didn't want me to come on this show was probably 20 to 1.
On the left.
On the left, yeah.
Yeah. That's damaging.
I think it's stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we invite people on the left consistently all the time.
Okay.
I mean, that's how the Sam's Theater thing started. I tweeted like, we've been trying to book people on the left. They just won't come on the show.
Yeah.
Vosh and Destiny typically will come on the show whenever they're available, and we're looking to do something. So I have tremendous respect for them. Kyle Kalinske agreed to come on, but he hosts his own show. So I have tremendous respect for Vosh coming on, considering he does his own show and took time to do ours. That's fantastic. And mild-mannered and calm and reasonable conversations. I disagree with him politically. That's awesome. But first of all, you know who I really don't like coming on the show is politicians. Mm-hmm. But we will welcome politicians on the show.
Why?
It's all fake.
Do you think so?
So I would say 98% of the politicians, and I'm telling you, these are conservative, these are Republicans, because Democrats, for the most part, don't come on the show. We've had like maybe 2 or 3 Democratic people, in our longevity. But it's like you bring people in, and then it's just like you ask them a question, they'll say, "That's a really good question. When I think about questions like this," I'm like, "Oh, here we go."
Yeah.
But it's a small handful of people that just have the conversation. Say what you will about Carrie Lake, she just says stuff.
Yeah.
Vivek Ramaswamy, he just says stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay.
It's refreshing. I respect that about him. I agree with you. Democrats need to get off message and be able to have real conversations. My experience with elected people is I think it is a thankless job in a way you can't appreciate if you have not done it. You're fundraising every second you're awake. You're going to events. You don't get vacation. Like it's supposedly breaking Congress right now. There's someone I'm working with, and they're doing events every few hours on their quote unquote break. So I think it is a very, very difficult job that people don't appreciate. And I think most people actually go into it for the right reasons, including on the right.
Yeah. We've gone way over. We've got to wrap up.
I'm so sorry, man.
No, it's good. And I think my final thought is just that, we can't always just look at how things were or what we think they were historically.
Yeah.
Because every policy we put in place has results that we could not foresee.
Sure.
So taking a look at like one member of Congress representing 775,000 people clearly makes no sense. Maybe 35,000 made sense back in the day, but now it's becoming untenable. And so it's resulting in political classes, financial classes. Like it's weird that we have royal families almost, like, the third person in the family to go into finance, the third person in the family to be a race car driver. It's like everything's becoming, isolated or whatever. And this is true for politics. I think that results in a political class, which results in resentment from people who are not privy to what it's like in the political class, and people in the political class who don't know what it's like to, say, work at a mechanic shop or something.
One of the things I see in Massachusetts is there's an entire industry of people that went to Harvard, and they go straight into the electoral class in Massachusetts, and they just don't have any idea what it's like to be homeless,
right?
To struggle to pay your rent. It's just privilege. And you talk about working class people as if they're a dumb animal you've got to manipulate. I've absolutely seen that. I think my last thought would be, Tim, the very, very best case in life, the most we get in life is what we fight for. And the very best government we get is the one that we work to bring to fruition. And I think one of my biggest problems with many people in politics right now, on the left and the right, is they believe if you burn the system down, you're one step away from utopia. And I don't think that's true. I think that the way to move forward as a country is to focus on democracy, to work on improving what's broken, And we need to believe in this. And I think all of us need to get out there and talk to people on the other side, which is why I'm here today.
Well, thank you for coming. And Alex, we didn't even talk about Gamergate.
No.
And it is what it is. I don't know. Whatever. Thanks for hanging out with
It
us.
sort of happened, yeah.
But, I appreciate you coming. And I don't know, the conversation went where it went. All the super chats are saying, Alex, pipe down. But, say la vie. We went way over. It was a good conversation. Thank you for coming. I really enjoyed it. And for everybody else, we'll be back tonight, 8 p.m., youtube.com/TimCastIRL, and we will see you all then.